梁哥制作，青春之火，作者程小青。听觉的比赛。我不是自己夸口，我的听觉虽及不上我的老友霍桑，可是也并算不得怎样低弱。那天破晓时分，霍桑只轻轻地说了一声
Production by Liang Gu, The Fire of Youth, author, Qing Shaoqing. 1. Auditory competition. I am not boasting. Although my hearing is not as good as that of my old friend Hawthorne, it is not that weak. At dawn that day, Hawthorne only said softly.
一个女子，我便突地从睡梦中惊醒。我向窗上望一望，小光已是白漫漫的。在这晚秋的当，这样的光色估量起来已是6点钟光景。在夏天的这时，霍桑早应当起床，往外边做运动早课。
A woman, I suddenly woke up from my sleep. I looked out the window, and the dawn light was already white. In this late autumn, with this light color, it was estimated that it was already 6 o'clock. At this time in the summer, Hawthorne should have gotten up early and gone out to do morning exercises.
吸收新鲜空气了。现今是秋天，我们略迟起一些。他此刻既然还好端端地躺在床上，怎么说什么女子不女子？莫非他也做什么甜蜜的好梦？梦境中遇见了一个女子，一个年轻的女子。可怜。
Get some fresh air. It's autumn now, so we're getting up a little late. Since he is still lying on the bed peacefully at this moment, how can he say that a woman is not a woman? Could it be that he also had some sweet dreams, in which he met a woman, a young woman? Poor.
一夜没有睡哩，一定是为着什么凶杀案来的。一连串感叹从霍桑嘴里透出来，使我吃了一惊。霍桑此刻醒着吗？还是梦呓？若说醒着，他明明还睡在床上，怎么有这不伦不类的说话？
He didn't sleep all night. He must be here for some murder case. A series of exclamations came out of Hawthorne's mouth, which surprised me. Is Hawthorne awake at this moment? Or is he talking in his sleep? If he is awake, he is obviously still sleeping in bed, so why are he talking like this?
霍桑呼叫我道：“包朗，醒醒吧，有凶案来了，别做梦里。”我一咕噜从床上坐起，答道：“我早已醒了，你才做梦里。”霍桑也已急急下床，向房门外指一指，说：“你等着瞧吧，我是不是做梦？”
Hawthorne suddenly called me, Bao Lang, wake up. There is a murder coming. Don't dream. I sat up from the bed and replied, I've already woken up. You were just dreaming. Hawthorne also hurriedly got out of bed, pointed to the door and said, just wait and see if I am dreaming.
苏妈上楼来报告了，室门上果然有弹指的声响，接着是那老妈子的声音：“先生们醒了吗？下面有一位女客说有万分要紧的事，一正等候着呢。”霍桑应了一声，我们就下来。
Suma came upstairs to report. Sure enough, there was a snapping sound on the door. Then the old woman's voice stopped. Gentlemen, are you awake? There was a female guest below who said something extremely important. Yi Zhang is waiting. Hawthorne responded, we'll come down.
苏妈便缓缓地下楼去，我才明白霍桑刚才的话并非梦呓，他早已听得了下面的声音，就知道有什么女子和凶案。这样看来，他的听觉究竟还比我高出一筹。我说：“你大概早已醒了。”
Sue's mother slowly went downstairs. Only then did I realize that what Hawthorne had just said was not just talking in his sleep. He could already hear the sounds below and knew there was a woman and a murder. It seems that his hearing is better than mine after all. I said, you are probably awake already.
听得了莱克和苏妈的谈话，才知是一个女子一夜没睡，此刻特地来报告凶案，是不是？霍桑一边穿衣一边摇头答道：“不是。”那女客说话的声音，我一句没有听得。
After listening to the conversation between the visitor and Sue's mother, I realized that it was a woman who had not slept all night and came here to report the murder. Yes or no? Hawthorne shook his head while dressing and replied, no. I didn't hear a word of the female guest's voice.
我的断语只是根据这两种声音而发的。我诧异地问道：“什么两种声音？一种是咯咯的木根皮鞋声，一种是苏妈的答话声。”我明明听得苏妈回答：“在的，可是他们还没有起来哩。”
My assertion is based on only 2 voices. I asked in surprise, what 2 sounds? One was the sound of wooden shoes with wooden heels, and the other was Sue's mother's reply. I clearly heard Sue's mother reply, yes, but they haven't gotten up yet.
这就是我的断语的根据。我一边匆匆穿衣，一边默想。他因着皮鞋的声音，假定莱克是一个女子，原不足为奇。因为高跟皮鞋是一般时髦女子穿的，因此推想那女子的年纪还轻。
This is the basis for my assertion. I hurriedly dressed while meditating. Because of the sound of leather shoes, he assumed that the visitor was a woman. It was not surprising. Because high-heeled leather shoes are generally worn by fashionable women, therefore, he assumed that the woman still young.
当然很合理，但是他还说那女子一夜没有睡，又知道一来报告的不是盗案，不是失踪，却是凶案，这又凭着什么呢？霍桑不等我问他，先自说道：“包朗，别多费心思吧。我的断语是否准确？”
Of course it makes sense. But he also said that the woman had not slept all night, and he knew that what Eli reported was not a robbery or a disappearance, but a murder. What is the reason for this? Before I could ask him, Hawthorne said to himself, Bao Lang, don't worry too much about it. Is my conclusion accurate?
还得到楼下去证明了才知道。你快些穿衣，别再发什么无谓的问难。梳洗既毕，我们就匆匆下楼。办事室里果然坐着一个修短适中的少妇，年纪还不到30。一的装束非常人士。
We won't know until we go downstairs to prove it. Get dressed quickly and don't ask any more unnecessary questions. After washing up, we hurried downstairs. As expected, sitting in the office was a young woman with moderate slender hair, less than 30 years old. Yi's dress was very fashionable.
上身穿一件淡绯色的花绸夹袄，下面系一条石式钻边的黑裙，足上穿一双灰色丝袜和挖花紫色纹皮的高跟皮鞋。我走进一时，还有一股香气袭击我的鼻孔。可是，一瞧一的容貌。
Wearing a pale crimson floral silk jacket, a fashionable black skirt with ruffled edges, a pair of gray stockings, and high-heeled leather shoes with carved purple patterns. As I approached E, there was still a scent of fragrance that hit my nostrils. But one look at Yi's appearance.
不由不令人吃惊。一的脸型本是瓜子似的，这时脂粉消退，下颊瘦削而惨白，越显得两全的高耸。一双眼睛深深地陷进了眼眶里去，嘴唇上也失去了天然的吸引力。
It's surprising. Yi's face was originally shaped like a melon seed, but now the makeup had faded away, her lower cheeks were thin and pale, and her cheekbones became more prominent. A pair of eyes were sunken deeply into their sockets, and their lips had lost their natural appeal.
一的淡黑色的眼珠本来一定是很动人的，此刻不但没有一些媚态，却满露着幽凄而恐怖的光彩。霍桑向一鞠了一个躬，便自己介绍，彼人是霍桑，这一位是包朗先生，请教尊姓。
Yi's light black eyes must have been very attractive. At this moment, not only is there no flattery, but it is full of sadness and horror. Hawthorne bowed to E and introduced himself. I am Hawthorne. This is Mr. Bao Lang. May I ask your surname?
那女子盈盈地立起身来，向我们答了一个礼。霍先生，包先生，我叫严协英，夫家姓张。霍桑说：“张夫人，对不起，你等了好久，请坐。”一说：“我应当请求先生们原谅，我昨夜一夜没有睡。”
The woman stood up gracefully and greeted us, Mr. Hua, Mr. Bao. My name is Yan Shuiying, and my husband's surname is Zhang. Hawthorne said, Mrs. Zhang, I'm sorry you've waited for a long time. Please sit down. E said, I should ask the gentleman for forgiveness. I didn't sleep all night last night.
心里又怀着恐怖，所以一等到东方发白，便慌忙赶出来。我忘了时间还早，打破先生们的清梦，十分抱歉。霍桑说：“不用客气，我们本来要起身了，请坐。我想你这样早赶来。”
There was fear in my heart again. So as soon as Dongfang turned white, he rushed out. I forgot that it was still early, and I'm very sorry to break the gentleman's dream. Hawthorne said, You're welcome. We were about to get up. Please take a seat. I wanted you to come so early.
一定有什么非常的祸患，是不是？女客坐下来。一的呼吸很急，脸色越见得惨白。一哽咽地说：“先生，是啊，我的丈夫被人谋死了。”我不由不把目光瞧到霍桑的脸上，霍桑也回了我一眼。
There must be some terrible trouble. Yes or no? The female guest sat down. Yi's breathing was rapid, and her face became increasingly pale. Yi choked and said, Sir, yes. My husband was murdered. I couldn't help but look at Hawthorne's face. Hawthorne also looked back at me.
仿佛说，我所料的一夜没有睡，和一所报告的是一件凶案。此刻你佩服不佩眼？他这暗示，我一望便已领会。可是他到底具什么神通，才能有这样的先见之明？我可想不出来。
It was as if he said, I expected E to stay up all night, and what he reported was a murder case. Do you admire him now? I understood his hint at a glance. But what kind of supernatural power does he have that enables him to have such foresight? I can't figure it out.
霍桑又向那妇人说：“那么，请你把尊夫被害的情形说明白，我们也许有可以尽力之处。”一用一块刺花的白丝巾按一按嘴，才颦眉地说：“详细的情形我也不知道。”
Hawthorne then said to the woman, Then please explain clearly the circumstances of my husband's murder. Maybe we can do our best. E pressed her mouth with an embroidered white silk scarf, then frowned and said, I don't know the details.
因为昨天我是回母家去的，到了晚上12点相近，看门间种花的金寿忽然到我母家去报信，说少爷昏倒了。那时我已经睡了，一听的这个消息，马上从床上起来，跟金寿一同回来。
Because I went back to my mother's house yesterday. At around 12 o'clock in the evening, Jean Shou, a janitor and gardener, suddenly went to my mother's house to report that the young master had fainted. I was already asleep at that time. As soon as I heard the news, I immediately got up from the bed and came back with Jean Shou.
到了家里，我才知有刚已经气绝，我的丈夫叫张有刚。我本不知道他是怎样死的， 但一瞧书室中器具混乱的形状，似乎他和什么人打过架，显见是被人家弄死的。可是那凶手是谁？
When I got home, I found out that Yu Gang had died. My husband's name was Zhang Yu Gang. I didn't know how he died, but looking at the chaotic shape of the utensils in the study room, it seemed that he had had a fight with someone, and it was obvious that he was killed by someone. But who is the murderer?
我们完全不知道。我的婆婆和小姑孝琴都是女流，一个打杂的阿荣恰巧回家去，家中只剩一个看门的金寿是一个男人，因此黑夜里发生了这样一件可怕的凶案，个个都吓得什么似的。
We have absolutely no idea. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law Xiaoqin are both girls. Rong, a handyman, happened to go home, and the only man left in the house was Jin Shou, the janitor. Therefore, such a terrible murder occurred in the dark night, and everyone was frightened.
那里还敢有什么举动？所以等到天色发白，我才赶到这里来请教。张夫人，你住在哪里？虬江路19号。我妈住在把子路敏德里。这是一件命案，发案的地点既然在北区。
What else would you dare to do there? So I waited until the sky turned white before I dared to come here to ask for advice. Mrs. Zhang, where do you live? Number 19, Zhejiang Road. My mom lives in Target Road, Mindlay. This is a murder case, since the location of the crime is in the North District.
照理应当先往北区警局里去报告，你怎么直接来见我？霍先生，你的话不错。我出来的时候，金寿已经到警察局里去报告了。我到这里来请求二位，原是我个人的意思。我不禁插口道
As usual, you should first report to the North District Police Station. Why did you come to see me directly? Mr. Hua, what you said is right. When I came out, Jin Shou has already gone to the police station to report. I come here to ask you too, it is my personal intention. I couldn't help but interjected.
那么你的义恩，可现以为这件案子的情节有些离奇，官家侦探们相当不了，才来叫我们帮助，这是一层理由，但还有一层保护我自己。霍桑的目光转一转，注意地问道：“什么意思？”
Then your kindness. But the county thought that the plot of this case was a bit bizarre, and the official detectives couldn't understand it. Did you come to ask us for help? This is a reason. But there is another layer, to protect myself. Hawthorne turned his eyes and asked attentively, What do you mean?
你怕什么人？那妇人定着眼珠，颤声说：“是，霍先生，我怕人家怀疑我。”哎，什么人怀疑你？为着什么缘故？你才怕人怀疑？伊沉吟了一下，才仰起头来，低声说：“我怕的就是我的婆婆。”
Who are you afraid of? The woman fixed her eyes and said in a trembling voice, Yes, Mr. Hua, I'm afraid that people will doubt me. Hey, who doubts you? For what reason? Are you afraid of people being suspicious? He pondered for a moment, then raised his head and whispered, It is my mother-in-law who I am afraid of.
伊在昨晚发案以后，已经说了一大难活。伊说我们夫妇俩平日不和睦，才会酿成这样的事。伊还说，昨天傍晚我回了母家，一到晚上，伊的儿子便胡遭惨死，这都是很可疑的。伊的意思。
After the incident last night, he had already said that it would be difficult to survive. He said that our husband and wife are not always on good terms, which is why things like this happened. He also said that I returned to my mother's house last night, and at night, Yi's son suddenly died tragically. This is all very suspicious. He means.
好像要把伊儿子的死归罪于我们俩的不和睦，并且牵涉我回母家去的事。霍先生，你想我怎能担当得起？我久闻两位先生的声明，不但能够给人家解决疑难。
It seems that the death of Yi's son was blamed on the disharmony between the two of us, and it also involved my return to my mother's house. Mr. Hua, how do you think I can afford it? I have long heard of the reputation of these two gentlemen, who are not only able to solve problems for others,
还常常替一般受屈的人处理辩护。所以霍桑止住伊道：“我要请问一句，你婆婆说你们夫妇俩不睦，这话可实在？”话是实在的。我和有刚的感情果然不大好，口角的事也是时常有的。
He often defends those who are aggrieved. So Hawthorne stopped and said, Well, I want to ask a question. Your mother-in-law said that you two are not getting along. Is this true? The words are true. As expected, the relationship between Yu Gang and I was not very good, and we often had quarrels.
为什么缘故才这样？我们俩的婚姻原是先父做主的。他叫严玉峰，两位可曾听得过？霍桑思索似的不及作答，我便点头插口，可就是前清做过山东巡抚的严玉峰，正是。
Why is this so? Our marriage was originally decided by our late father. His name is Yan Yufeng. Have you ever heard of me? Hawthorne hesitated to answer as if he was thinking. I nodded and interjected, Is it Yan Yufeng who was the governor of Shandong in the former Qing dynasty? Exactly.
他老人家非常守旧，婚姻的事绝对不许儿女们自己做主。有刚的四父叫张世勋，是做军装买办的，跟我的三舅舅相识。三舅舅做的媒，说有刚怎么好怎么好，才配成了这对怨偶。
He was a very conservative man and never allowed his children to make their own decisions about marriage. Yogang's heir, named Zhang Shixuan, was a comprador in military uniforms and met my third uncle. The third uncle acted as a matchmaker and said how good Yugang was, so they became this grudge couple.
其实有刚是个纨绔，平素欢喜野游，喝酒赌博，什么都干。结婚以后仍旧不改他的寻花问柳的固态。有时我劝他几句，他不但不听，还要白眼相加，往往就因此争吵。你想象这个样子。
In fact, Yugang was a dandy who always enjoyed traveling, drinking, gambling, and anything else. After getting married, he still did not change his old ways of looking for flowers and asking for help. Sometimes I try to persuade him, but he not only refuses to listen, but also glares at me, often quarreling over this. You imagine this.
我们怎么会得和睦？霍桑沉吟了一下，问道：“昨天你为着什么事回家？也因为经过了一场口角，我才负气回去。为什么是口角的？”严谐英又低垂了头，气气地说：“我因为他时常不回家。”
How can we have peace? Hawthorne pondered for a moment and asked, Why did you go home yesterday? It was also because of a quarrel that I went back in anger. Why the quarrel? Yan Shuiying lowered her head again and said regularly, I often don't go home because of him.
也就不时往我妈家去小住。他却说我不该如此，说话中还带着侮辱的话。我耐不住，就和他斗起口来。霍桑低着头在地席上凝视了一回，接着略略抬起些目光。
I would stay at my mother's house from time to time. But he said that I shouldn't be like this, and his words were insulting. I couldn't bear it anymore, so I started to fight with him. Hawthorne lowered his head and stared at the mat for a while, then raised his gaze slightly.
似乎向那妇人偷睨了一眼，随即立起身来。他说：“张夫人，你先回去，我们俩随后就到。”张严氏向我们俩瞧一瞧，又低下了头，默然不答。一的眼光中似乎表示心中有什么怕惧。
He seemed to steal a glance at the woman, then stood up immediately. He said, Mrs. Zhang, you go back first. We will be there soon. Zhang Yan looked at both of us, lowered his head and said nothing. Yi's eyes seemed to indicate some fear in her heart.
一个人不敢回去。霍桑又说：“张夫人，请放心回去。我们查验之后，事情总可以有分晓，绝没人敢任意难为你。”严谐英又把那一方刺花的白丝巾在嘴乳上按了一按，才点头起立。
No one dares to go back alone. Hawthorne added, Mrs. Zhang, please go back with confidence. After we check, the matter will always be clear, and no one will dare to arbitrarily make things difficult for you. Yan Shuiying pressed the embroidered white silk scarf on her lips again, then nodded and stood up.
一胆怯地说：“那么请先生们立刻就来。”霍桑答应了，便送一出去。一会他就回进来。他说：“包朗，据我料想，这绝不是一件平常的事。你的日记中大概又可以多记一件奇案了。”真的。
E timidly said, Then please, gentlemen, come immediately. Hawthorne agreed and sent E out. He'll come back in a moment. He said, Bao Lang, as far as I know, this is by no means an ordinary thing. You can probably record one more strange case in your diary. Real?
我想起了方才的疑团，霍桑，你方才所预料的一夜没睡和一所报告的是一件凶案，果然已经证实了。但你就凭着什么根据，我还没有明白。这是很明显的。我已经说过我的根据。
I remembered the mystery just now, Hawthorne. What you just expected, he didn't sleep all night, and what he reported was a murder, has been confirmed. But on what basis you based it, I still don't understand. It's obvious. I've said that on my basis.
就在苏妈所说的那一句答话，在的，可是他们还没起来哩。你是从这一句答语上推想那严氏的问句，量来就是霍先生和包先生可在家里吗？这样的问句，若在日间，本来是很平常的。
Just the answer that Suma said, yes, but they haven't gotten up yet. If you try to infer Yan's question from this answer, it probably means, can Mr. Hua and Mr. Bao at home? This kind of question would have been very common in the daytime.
但在这破晓时分，不问我们起来不起来，只问我们在家不在家，可见一的脑中实在没有一个睡字。因着一夜没有睡，好像在日间一样，慌忙中便照着一的主观发出那突兀的问句。
But at this early dawn, they didn't ask us whether we were up or not, but only asked whether we were at home. It can be seen that there was really no word sleep in Yi's mind. Because he didn't sleep all night, as if it were daytime, he hurriedly asked the question according to Yi's subjective point of view.
因此我就推想到一夜没有睡了。我点点头，理由果真不错，足见霍桑的推理能力的确入微。我又问道：“你怎么又知道一来请托的是一件凶案？”那就是根据第一层来的，更容易明白。
So I assumed that he had not slept all night. I nodded. The reason is indeed good, which shows that Hawthorne's reasoning ability is indeed subtle. I asked again, how do you know that what Eli asked was a murder case? That's based on the first level, which is easier to understand.
你想，一是个女子，一夜没睡，此刻又亲自到我们这里来，显见是一件利害关切的重大案子。盗案或失踪果然也重要，但到底不及命案的严重，这是一层理由。还有一层，盗案或失踪案。
You think she is a woman. She has not slept all night, and now she comes to us in person. It is obviously a case of high stakes and high stakes. Robbery or disappearance is indeed important, but in the end it is not as serious as murder. This is a reason. There is another level, robbery or disappearance.
发觉的时间大概总在人家早晨起身以后。这一案既在昨夜夜间发生，却挨到这时候才来找寻我们。那定是因着黑夜中女子为恐怖心所胜，不敢出门，所以直到天亮了才来报案。
The time of discovery is probably after people get up in the morning. Since this case happened last night, it took until now to find us. That must be because in the dark night, the woman was overcome by fear and did not dare to go out, so she did not report the crime until dawn.
这又分明是一件足以使人发生恐怖的杀人案子。若是盗窃或别的案子，或是果真在半夜发觉，那就情形不同，也许要连夜告发，不会等到天明了。我听了这一番解释，不觉暗暗叹服。
This is clearly a horrifying murder case. If it was a theft or other case, or if it was discovered in the middle of the night, the situation would be different, and the report might have to be made all night long instead of waiting until dawn. After hearing this explanation, I felt secretly impressed.
霍桑的理论处处是有实际根据的，不过根据的取得就凭着他的特别敏锐的头脑，不是一般没训练的人所能望相背的。霍桑接着说：“我已叫苏妈快预备早餐，你也快些准备。”
Hawthorne's theories are all based on practical evidence, but the basis he obtained depends on his particularly sharp mind, which is beyond the reach of ordinary people without training. Hawthorne continued, I have asked Sue's mother to prepare breakfast quickly. You should also prepare breakfast quickly.
我们一同往张家去。2. 案情：张有刚的住宅在虬江路的中段，是一座相当宽大的面南的西式房子。门前一带青砖的短墙，架着2扇铁条的门。进门靠右的一边就是一间小小的门房。
Let's go to Zhang's house together. 2. Facts of the case. Zhang Yougang's residence is in the middle of Qujiang Road. It is a fairly large Western-style house facing south. There is a short wall of green bricks in front of the door, sandwiched between 2 iron bars. Enter the door. On the right side is a small concierge.
左右有2条弧形的水泥车径交接成一个环形，直通到正屋。车径两旁都种着短短的冬青，冬青后面铺着草地，还种几株杂树，中央却是一个隆起的花圃。
There are 2 arc-shaped cement truck paths on the left and right, which connect to form a ring and lead directly to the main house. Short hollies are planted on both sides of the car path. Behind the hollies, there is grass and a few miscellaneous trees. In the center is a raised flower bed.
散列着许多剪秋罗、大理菊之类的草花，正身子嫣红地开放着。屋子右边有一条碎石小径通到屋后去，屋后似乎另有一个小园。我们走进门时，有一个人从门房里走出来招呼。
There are many grass flowers such as dahlias and daisies scattered here and there, which are blooming in deep purple and red. There is a gravel path on the right side of the house that leads to the back of the house. There seems to be another small garden behind the house. As we walked in, a man came out of the concierge to greet us.
霍桑向他瞧了一眼，问道：“你是金寿？”那人是一个长身的大汉，瞧上去约有30左右年纪，面色苍黑，浓眉大眼，显得是一个壮健有力的人。他听见霍桑一问，站定了，好像呆了一呆。
Hawthorne glanced at him and asked, Are you Jean Shou? The man was a tall man, about 30 years old, with a pale complexion, thick eyebrows, and big eyes, making him appear to be a strong and powerful man. When he heard Hawthorne ask, he stood still for a moment.
他答道：“正是，先生们可就是。”霍桑忙点点头，答道：“我们是你家少奶奶请来的。一在里面吗？”金寿陪着笑脸道：“哦，是的，少奶说过的。但少奶刚才又重新出去了。”霍桑诧异道：“又出去了？”
Exactly, he replied. Gentlemen, that's it. Hawthorne nodded quickly and replied, We were invited by your young mistress. Is he in there? Jean Shou said with a smile, Oh, yes, the young lady said it. But the young lady just went out again. Hawthorne said in surprise, Going out again?
一往那里去的？一没有说。不过我看见一出去时脸上气冲冲的，仿佛跟太太闹过几句。一关照我，等一位姓霍一位姓包的先生到了，可以引进去见太太。请。他弯弯腰，请我们进去。
Where did he go? Yi didn't say. However, I saw that Yi's face was angry when he went out, as if he had had some trouble with his wife. Yi Guan took care of me until a gentleman named Hua and a gentleman named Bao arrived and could be introduced to see my wife. Please. He bent down and invited us in.
霍桑仍站定了不走。慢，你家太太一个人在里面吗？一在和巡官先生们谈话。巡官来了多少时候？1刻多钟。他同着一位侦探先生，先在书室中把少爷的尸身验了一回。
Hawthorne still stood still, slowed down. Is your wife in there alone? I'm talking to the inspectors and gentlemen. How long has it been since the inspector came? More than a quarter of an hour. Together with a detective, he examined the young master's body in the study room for a while.
此刻正把太太和小姐们叫下楼来，在气座室中问话。那么，我们用不着急急觐见。 你轻轻地引我们到气座室门外，让我们顺便听听，免得打断他们的谈话。金寿向我们打量了一会。
At this moment, the wife and young ladies were being called downstairs and questioned in the sitting room. Then, we don't have to rush in. You gently led us outside the sitting room door so that we could listen so as not to interrupt their conversation. Jean Shou looked at us for a while.
缓缓道：“既然如此，你们只需立在那气座室的窗外就可以听得见。”他用手向正屋前10级西旁的一个窗口指一指。霍桑点点头，便引我顺着那水泥车道走过去。正屋前面的左右。
He said slowly, "In that case, you only need to stand outside the window of the sitting room to hear it." He pointed with his hand to a window on the west side of the stone steps in front of the main house. Hawthorne nodded and led me along the cement driveway. The left and right sides in front of the main house.
各有一个小花圃，围列着一圈短短的山矾，各成一个椭圆形。山矾的外圈还有一盆盆傲霜的秋菊，淡黄嫩白的交相辉映，有一种优异的风致。我们的足步很轻，目光虽住在花圃上面。
Each has a small flower garden, surrounded by a circle of short mountain trees, each forming an oval. There are also pots of frost-proud autumn chrysanthemums on the outer circle of the mountain fan. The pale yellow and tender white fields complement each other, giving it a quiet and elegant style. Our steps were light, but our eyes were focused on the flower beds.
精神却早已飞进了那气座室。它居于屋子的西面，靠花圃有2个窗口，都罩着白纱的窗帘。我看见靠近石阶的一个窗口，里面的窗帘虽下，外面的玻璃窗完全开着，这正配我们的需要。
The spirit has already flown into the sitting room. It is located on the west side of the house, with 2 windows near the flower garden, both covered with white gauze curtains. I saw a window near the stone steps. Although the curtains inside were lowered, the glass windows outside were completely open. This suits our needs.
我们跨过山矾，搂着身子，悄悄地走到窗口下面，屏息地扶着。里面有一个年轻的女子的声音正在答话。一说正是我先下楼来。我听得了楼下许多奇怪声音，心中早怀着鬼胎。
We crossed the mountain gate, hunched over, quietly walked under the window, and lay down breathlessly. A young woman's voice answered inside. E said, "That's right, I came downstairs first." I could hear many strange sounds downstairs, and I had already harbored ghosts in my heart.
后来我猛听得扑通一声，好像有什么重物倒在地上，接着便寂静无声。我哥哥也不上楼。我等了一会，一们没有响动，就按捺不住。我哥哥喝醉了，虽然常要发脾气。
Then I heard a sudden thud, as if something heavy fell to the ground, and then there was silence. My brother doesn't go upstairs either. I waited for a while, but there was no sound from them, so I couldn't hold it any longer. My brother is drunk, although he often loses his temper.
可是这种声音却从来不曾有过，因此我为着不愿惊动妈，悄悄地执着一只洋烛走下楼来。我想瞧瞧哥哥是不是一个人在下面，或是另有什么人和他打过架，我哥哥给人打倒了。
But this kind of sound has never happened before. So, not wanting to disturb my mother, I quietly walked downstairs holding a foreign candle. I wanted to see if my brother was alone down there, or if someone else had fought with him, and my brother had been knocked down.
因为先前的那些响声实在很像有人打架似的。又有一个女子插口说：“是啊，那种声音我们虽然听惯，但究竟没有昨晚那么的可怕。”孝琴说的好像打架，真一点不错。
Because the previous noises really sounded like someone was fighting. Another woman interjected, "Yes. Although we are used to hearing that kind of sound, it is not as scary as last night." Xiao Qin said it was like fighting, which is true.
这声音的年龄比较老些。一个男子声音应道：“那声音老太太也听得的吗？”张小姐，以后怎么样？我走下了楼，轻轻走到书房门前。书房门紧紧关着，又没有一丝灯光露出来。
This voice sounds older. A man's voice responded. Can the old lady hear that voice? Well, Miss Zhang, what will happen next? I walked downstairs and walked gently to the study door. The study door was closed tightly, and there was no light.
我凑着耳朵一听，仍旧不听得一些声响。我越发疑心，一时又没有把书房门推开的胆力，因为我哥哥的脾气是非常偏激的。我因着前2次的经验，不觉有些怕。可是我既然下了楼，
I leaned my ears to listen, but still couldn't hear any sounds. I became more and more suspicious, and for a while I didn't have the courage to push the study door open. Because my brother's temper is very extreme. Because of my previous 2 experiences, I felt a little scared. But now that I've gone downstairs,
又不肯依旧怀着疑团上去，所以踌躇了一会，我到底放大了胆子，轻轻地握住了门钮，将门推开了1寸。哎呦！那时你可就瞧见令兄的尸体。那少女一时并不急答，停了一会，才颤声答道。
But he refused to go up there, still harboring doubts. So after hesitating for a while, I finally gained the courage, gently held the door knob, and pushed the door open an inch. Ouch! Did you see Brother Ling's body then? The girl did not answer immediately. She paused for a while and then replied in a trembling voice.
那时我的眼光从门缝间瞧到书房中，但觉里面黑漆漆的，电灯已完全熄灭。 我不禁一凛，但仍不心死，顺手将执着的洋烛送进门缝，向书房中一照，我才看见进门有一只椅子倒在地上。
At that time, I looked into the study through the crack in the door, but I felt that it was dark inside and the lights had been completely turned off. I couldn't help but shudder, but I still didn't want to give up. I put the persistent candle through the crack of the door and took a light into the study. Only then did I see a chair lying on the ground near the door.
椅子旁边，我哥哥直僵僵地躺着。这情形实在是可怕的。这是另一个粗大的男子声音。先前的一个男子又问道：“那时你受了这样的惊吓，又怎样处置？”我记不得了。
Next to the chair, my brother was lying stiffly. Well, this situation is really terrible. This is another thick man's voice. A man from before asked again, how did you deal with such a fright at that time? I can't remember.
我记得仿佛曾喊过一声，以后我就记不清楚。这时老年的妇人又接嘴说，孝琴喊了一声，便晕过去了。我和王妈听得了呼声，就赶下来。孝琴跌倒在书房门外面，洋烛丢在地上。
I remember shouting something. I won't remember clearly from now on. At this time, the old woman continued. Xiaoqin shouted and then fainted. Wang Ma and I heard the cry and rushed down. Xiaoqin fell outside the study door and dropped the candle on the ground.
幸亏已熄灭了，烛油却染了一满身。老太太，当时你可是听得了令爱的呼叫声音才下楼的？是的，我起先听得有刚的喧闹声，知道他昨晚往朋友家去喝喜酒，喝醉了，又在那里发酒疯。
Fortunately, it was extinguished, but the candle oil stained Yi's body. Old lady, did you go downstairs only after hearing your daughter's call? Yes. I heard Yogan's noise at first, and knew that he went to a friend's house last night to drink wedding wine, got drunk, and went crazy again there.
我虽觉他的声音较大，有些怀疑，可是不曾下楼。后来听得吵闹声渐渐的停了，正想重新睡，朦胧间忽听得孝琴在下面嘶声喊叫，我才慌忙起来，走到后房，唤醒了王妈一同下来。
Although I felt his voice was loud and a little suspicious, I never went downstairs. Later, I heard the noise gradually stopped, and just as I was about to go back to sleep, I suddenly heard Xiaoqin yelling from below, so I got up in a hurry, walked to the back room, woke up Wang Ma, and came down with me.
那时金寿也赶进来，我们就急忙将孝琴从地上扶起，又搬亮了书房中的电灯，就发现有刚将卧在地板上。我连叫他几声，不答应。金寿摸摸他的口鼻，气息已断绝了。我吓得落了魂。
At that time Jin Shou also rushed in. We hurriedly lifted Xiaoqin up from the ground, turned on the light in the study, and found that Xiaoqin was lying stiff on the floor. I called him several times, but he didn't answer. Jin Shou touched his mouth and nose, and found that his breath was gone. I was so scared that I lost my mind.
幸亏王妈和金寿扶住我，才没有晕过去。那时书房中可有什么别的人？没有，只有有刚一个人躺在地板上。我们慌了一会，还是金寿有些主意。他先叫王妈将孝琴送上楼去。
Fortunately, Wang Ma and Jin Shou supported me so I didn't faint. Was there anyone else in the study at that time? No. There was only one person lying on the floor. We panicked for a while, but Jin Shou had some ideas. He first asked Wang Ma to send Xiaoqin upstairs.
第二次又扶我上去，随后他才到把子路去报信，因为那时候谐英，我的好媳妇还舒舒服服的在一的娘家里。室中略略静默，霍桑仍低垂着头，成见取出小册子写了几笔。
The second time he helped me up. Then he went to Target Road to report the news. Because at that time, Shuiying, my good daughter-in-law, was still comfortably at Yi's mother's house. There was a slight silence in the room. Hawthorne still lowered his head, took out the pamphlet and wrote a few words.
他回转头来向我侧一侧头，似乎同我室中的谈话可听清楚没有？我点一点头。接着窗口中又有声音透出来。第一个男子又问：“张小姐，你听的声音下楼，可记得是什么时候？”
He turned his head and tilted his head towards me, as if he could not hear clearly the conversation in my room. I nodded. Then there was another sound coming from the window. The first man asked again, Ms. Zhang, when you heard the sound and went downstairs, do you remember when?
这倒没有注意，我记得哥哥回来时约莫才交10点。老妇也说不错，我睡的时候只有9点半钟，后来被有刚拍桌机椅的声音吵醒，钟上已过了10点半。张小姐，令兄回来时你还没有睡？是。
This was not noticed. I remember that when my brother came back, we made an appointment and it was only 10 o'clock. The old woman also said, not bad. It was only 9:30 when I went to bed. Later, I was woken up by the sound of you gang banging the table and the chair. It was already past 10:30 on the clock. Miss Zhang, were you still awake when your brother came back? Yes.
昨晚我还在看书，所以听得很清楚。从金兄回家直到你下楼，这中间有多少时候？我不大注意，大约有1个多钟头。你方才说令兄酒后回家常常发酒疯，他可是天天如此的。这也不是。
I was reading a book last night, so I heard it very clearly. How much time was there between when Brother Jean came home and when you came downstairs? I don't pay much attention. About an hour or so. You just said that your brother often goes crazy when he comes home after drinking. Is he like this every day? That's not the case either.
他不是天天喝酒的，有时他和朋友喝了几杯回来便要吵闹。他的酒性是很可怕的，他吵闹的时候谁都不敢近他。我嫂子因着劝他的缘故，曾被他打过几次。去年夏天和今年春天。
He doesn't drink every day. Sometimes he and his friends would have a few drinks and make a scene when they came back. His alcoholism is terrible. When he was noisy, no one dared to approach him. My sister-in-law was beaten several times by him because she tried to persuade him. Last summer and this spring.
我也吃过他2次亏。第一次我因为他吵闹不休走下楼来，他一见我不问情由便举起手来掴我一掌。第二次他独个儿骂人，我劝了他一句又吃他一拳。从这2次以后我就任他吵闹。
I also suffered from his losses twice. The first time I came downstairs because he was making a lot of noise. As soon as he saw me, without asking why, he raised his hand and slapped me. The second time he cursed alone. I tried to persuade him and then punched him again. After these 2 times, I just let him make noise.
再不敢下楼。不过昨天的声音实在太奇怪了，我才冒险走下来。那老妇又说：“先生们，这件事终要请你们给我儿子伸冤，因为有刚的脾气虽然不大好，但此番明明是被人家谋死的。”
Don't dare go downstairs again. But the sound yesterday was so strange that I took the risk and walked down. The old woman said again, "Gentlemen, I will ask you to avenge my son in this matter." Because although Yogang's temper was not very good, he was clearly murdered this time.
谋死的情由，我刚才已经说过，先生们量必也明白了。这是有性命出入的，若没有确实的证据，不能随便说是什么人干的。证据不证据，全要靠先生们去找了。
I have just stated the reason for seeking death, and I doubt you gentlemen will understand it. There is a difference in life. Without solid evidence, you cannot just say who did it. Evidence or not, it's all up to the gentleman to find it.
若说内幕中的情形已经非常明显，别的莫说，但瞧昨天傍晚，邪英也和有刚大闹了一场，才回娘家去的。这个我已经知道。老太太，你刚才不是说金喜的哥哥叫严小山，是做过县知事的？
If we say that the situation in the inside story is already very obvious. Not to mention anything else, but last night, Shuaiying and Yu Gang had a big fight before going back to her parents' house. Well, I already know this. Old lady, didn't you just say that my wife's brother is called Yan Shaoshan and he was a county governor?
是啊，就为这一家是做官的，所以一才装足威风，瞧不起婆婆和丈夫。其实一真是一个白虎星，一进门就克掉一的阿公，此番一又狠心的弄出这样的。那少女又插口说：“妈，别这样说。”
Yes. Just because the Yi family is an official, Yi Kai pretends to be dignified and looks down on her mother-in-law and husband. In fact, Yi Zhen is a white tiger star, who defeated Yi's grandpa as soon as he entered the door. This time Yi was cruel enough to do something like this. The girl interrupted again, "Mom, don't say that."
这件事嫂嫂是不是有关系？到底还需查明了再说。你这样子口口声声说定是一，被严家的人听得了，不是要闹出岔子来吗？那男子也附和道：“是啊，我们不能先下断语。凶手是谁？”
Whether the sister-in-law is related to this matter or not remains to be found out. You keep saying that it must be Yi. If the Yan family hears it, isn't it going to cause trouble? The man also echoed, "Yes. We cannot judge first. Who is the murderer?"
等到查明白了再说，不迟。现在我再问一句，昨天他们夫妇俩的吵闹究竟为的什么？老妇道：“哎呦，说出来也丢脸。”邪英近来越发不对了，每逢有刚不在家，一便自由自在的出去。
It's not too late to wait until we find out. Now let me ask one more question. What was the reason for the quarrel between the couple yesterday? The old woman said, "Ouch. It's embarrassing to say it. Xiaiying has been acting more and more wrong recently. Whenever Gang is not at home, he goes out freely."
这里面的情形自然不必我说，可是有刚偶然说一几句，依旧破口相骂，闹一个不亦乐乎。不但如此，依自身虽不知简述，一听得有刚要纳妾，依却反发足慈威，竭力反对。俗语说
Of course I don't need to explain the situation here. But when you just happened to say a few words to Yi started to curse each other, making a big fuss. Not only that, although Yi himself did not know how to restrain himself, when he heard that someone was about to take a concubine, he would show his full strength and oppose it with all his strength. As the saying goes.
养只母鸡会生蛋。一个女人结婚了3年，自己没有出息，又不守妇道，却偏偏仗着母家的势力瞧不起我们。侦探先生，你想气人不气人，可恶不可恶？这样说，你儿子曾经要想纳妾。
Raising a hen will lay eggs. A woman has been married for 3 years. She has no future and is not a woman, but she relies on the power of her mother's family to look down on us. Mr. Detective, do you want to make people angry or hateful? So, your son once wanted to take a concubine.
我正听到这里， 忽觉有一个细小的飞虫飞进了我的鼻孔，鼻孔中的神经一受刺激，便禁不住打起喷嚏来。这无意中的一喷嚏竟惊动了气作室中的人们，里面的谈话声音便立刻停止。
Just as I was hearing this, I suddenly felt a tiny flying insect fly into my nostrils. When the nerves in the nostrils are stimulated, they can't help but sneeze. This unintentional sneeze actually startled the people in the sitting room, and the conversation inside immediately stopped.
3. 失事中，无意中的一个喷嚏造成了这样的后果，我觉得很囧。霍桑也知道事情已弄僵，是不能再偷听下去。他向我皱皱眉，不发一言，便立直了身子，大踏步跨上正屋的石级走进去。
3. In the corpse room. I was embarrassed that an unintentional sneeze had caused this. Hawthorne also knew that the matter was at a standstill and could no longer eavesdrop. He frowned at me and without saying a word, he stood up straight, strode up the stone steps of the main room and walked in.
我也懊恼地在后面跟着。正屋的中间是一个课堂，排列着一组蒙着紫色丝绸的沙发一座，地上铺着一条灰白色的地毯，靠壁有一张红木的半桌，供着许多古瓷古董，陈设非常富丽。
I followed behind in frustration. In the middle of the main room is the living room, lined with a group of sofa seats covered with purple silk. There was a gray-white carpet on the floor. There is a mahogany half-table against the wall, with many ancient porcelain and antiques, and the furnishings are very rich.
这课堂面积很大，似乎除了特别宴会，寻常是不经用的。那时气作室的门压得开了，走出一个穿栗壳色花呢长夹袍的中年男子来。霍桑本来认得他，彼此就点了一点头。
This living room is very large and seems not to be used except for special banquets. At that time, the door of the sitting room opened, and a middle-aged man wearing a chestnut-colored tweed jacket walked out. Hawthorne would have known him. They nodded to each other.
后面还有一个穿袍褂留短须的矮胖子，却不认识霍桑，只顾向我们打量。后来我知道，那个和霍桑招呼的是北区警署里的侦探长姚国英，就是先前在市中主持问话的人。
Behind us was a short, fat man wearing a robe and a short beard, but he didn't recognize Hawthorne and just looked at us. Later I learned that the person who greeted Hawthorne was Yao Guiying, the chief detective of the North District Police Station, who was the one who conducted the interview in the room earlier.
他近来连破几件盗案，很有些声誉。还有那个矮胖子是本区的巡官王希年。我们在窗外听得的一次粗壮声音，便是这位巡官先生。姚国英把将巡官和我们介绍了几句。
He has solved several robberies recently and has a good reputation. And that short fat man is Wang Ximian, the inspector of this district. The loud voice we heard outside the window was that of the inspector. Yao Guiying introduced Inspector Jiang to us for a few words.
便一同走进气作室中，里面有2个妇人，一老一少，就是死者张有刚的母亲和妹妹，装束都很朴素。那老的年纪已有56、7，皱纹满额，肤色糙黄，双目却圆黑而有微光。
Then they walked into the sitting room together. There were 2 women inside, one old and one young, who were the mother and sister of the deceased Zhang Yugang. The attire is all plain. The old man was 56 or 17 years old. His forehead was full of wrinkles, his complexion was rough and yellow, but his eyes were round, black and majestic.
少女的年纪约在24、5，但圆形的面庞，灵活的眸子，脸上却白得没有血色。衣穿一件灰青素绸的薄棉袄，玄色的套裙，脚上是蓝缎的绣花鞋。这时一的左手执着一块白金。
The girl was about 24 or 5 years old, with an egg-shaped face and lively eyes, but her face was so white that there was no blood. E wears a thin cotton-padded jacket made of gray and blue plain silk, a black skirt suit, and blue satin embroidered shoes on her feet. At this time, Yi's left hand was holding a white towel.
正在揉衣的眼睛，母女俩面对面坐着，相对凄然，显然都被悲哀之神所控制着。旁边还站着一个50上下的老妈子，低沉了头，好像牙齿在打颤，越发助长了这时中的阴气恐怖的气氛。
Rubbing Yi's eyes. The mother and daughter sat facing each other, looking relatively miserable, both obviously controlled by the god of sorrow. There was an old woman in her 50s standing next to her, her head lowered as if her teeth were chattering, which further contributed to the gloomy and terrifying atmosphere in the room.
霍桑恭敬地鞠了一个躬，便向那年老的妇人说：“张太太，我们是令习言谐英女士请来的。不过我们的职务是在替死者雪冤，求良心和法律上的公道，不是替任何人做辩护来的。”
Hawthorne bowed respectfully and said to the old woman, Mrs. Zhang, we were invited by your daughter-in-law, Ms. Yan Jiaying. However, our duty is to avenge the grievances of the deceased and seek justice from conscience and law. Justice does not come from defending anyone.
这一点请你别误会才好。老妇向霍桑瞪了一眼，眼光中显然有些敌意。霍桑却装作看不见的样子，并不合一的视线相接。老妇慢吞吞地说：“先生，你们如果为有刚申冤，那是再好没有。”
Please don't misunderstand this. The old woman glared at Hawthorne, with obvious hostility in her eyes. Hawthorne pretended not to see it, and did not meet Yi's eyes. The old woman said slowly, Sir, it would be great if you avenge Yu Gang.
我告诉你们，有刚是2房里4过来的，今年28岁，是我张氏2房的尖挑子。 他讨老婆已经3年，可是我的好媳妇还不曾给他生一个儿子。此番他遭了这样的惨死，我张氏从此绝了嗣。
Let me tell you, Yu Gang is the son of my second wife. He is 28 years old and is the son-in-law of my second wife, Zhang. He has been begging for a wife for 3 years, but my good wife has not given him a son yet. This time he suffered such a tragic death, and my family, Zhang, has no heirs.
你们若能够替他伸冤，张氏的老祖宗也要感恩的。霍桑皱着眉，略略点了点头，回头向姚国英说：“方才你们的谈话，我已经约略听得几句。这一着，我是为顺便省事起见，请你原谅。”
If you can avenge him, Zhang's ancestors will also be grateful. Hawthorne frowned, nodded slightly, turned back to Yao Guiying and said, I have roughly listened to a few words of your conversation just now. I did this just to save trouble. Please forgive me.
现在我要先看一看尸首。你们不是已经验过了吗？是的，我和姚探长一同验过了。就看张有刚一定是给人杀死的。我听了他的话，不觉暗暗好笑。我知道我有口快的弱点。
Now I want to see the body first. Haven't you already experienced it? Yes, I tested it with Inspector Yao. According to my opinion, Zhang Yugang must have been killed by others. After listening to his words, I felt secretly amused. I know I have a weakness for speaking quickly.
霍桑常说我近乎鲁莽，现在这位将巡官的鲁莽的资格似乎还要高我一级。霍桑神色如常，闲闲地答道：“哦，当真是被杀的。你可曾得到凶器？没有，但从他的胸口的伤痕看起来。”
Hawthorne often said that I was almost reckless. Now Inspector John's reckless qualifications seem to be one level higher than mine. Hawthorne looked normal and replied leisurely, Oh, were you really killed? Did you get the murder weapon? No. But it looks like from the scars on his chest.
显见是被尖刀致命的。那么这一件是谋杀案，是不是？当然，我们找了好久，找不到凶器，即此依着，已显见是被杀无疑。好，我们姑且瞧一瞧再说。那胖子很起劲的首先引导出了气做事。
Apparently he was killed by a sharp knife. Then this one is a murder. Yes or no? Certainly. We searched for a long time but couldn't find the murder weapon. With this move, it is obvious that he was killed. Good. Let's take a look and then talk. The fat man enthusiastically led him out of the sitting room first.
穿过课堂，便去开东边的书室门。性急口快，的确可以做这位巡官先生的口语。当姚国英问话的时候，没有他的风，我只听得他开了一句口，委实已给冷落了多时。此刻他见了我们。
Passed through the living room and opened the study door on the east side. Impatient and quick-tongued can indeed be used as a testimonial for this Mr. Inspector. When Yao Guiying asked questions, he was not involved. I only heard him speak once, but he had been left out for a long time. Now he met us.
分明要乘机发泄和卖弄一下。霍桑又故意敷衍着他，他就越发得意洋洋地起劲起来。书室中有一种凌乱可怖的景状，居室门2、3步外，横着那张有刚的尸体，头东而足西。
He clearly wanted to take the opportunity to vent and show off. Hawthorne deliberately perfunctory him again, and he became more and more proud and energetic. There was a messy and terrifying scene in the study room. 2 or 3 steps away from the door, there was the body of Yu Gang lying sideways, with its head east and feet west.
他身上穿一件淡棕色碧鸡夹袍，原色毛细呢马褂，下身穿着一条淡咖啡色华丝格夹裤，足上丝袜和纯锦缎的鞋子都是新的，式样也特别考究。这时，不但他的胸口的衣纽已经解开。
He wears a light brown serge jacket, a plain woolen mandarin jacket, a pair of light brown Chinese silk trousers, silk stockings, and pure brocade shoes, all new and of particularly elegant style. At this time, not only had the buttons on his chest been untied.
下身的衣服也皱褶不齐，似乎临死时在地上打滚扭转过的。尸身旁边有一只青岛的橡木椅子和一只雕花的茶几，还有一个破碎的花瓶，瓶水泼了满地，痕迹还显然可见。
The clothes on his lower body were also wrinkled and uneven, as if he had rolled and twisted on the ground before he died. Next to the body were an overturned oak chair and a carved coffee table. There was also a broken vase, the water from the bottle was spilled all over the floor, and the traces were still clearly visible.
尸身头部的一端向着第一个面向花圃的窗口，一扇窗还开着，但白纱的条子窗帘却沉沉的下垂。室中的器具都是很精致华贵的，而且大半是舶来品，不过给予我的印象是庸俗和凌乱。
The end of the body's head points towards the first window facing the garden. One window was still open, but the sliver curtains of white gauze drooped heavily. The utensils in the room are all very exquisite and luxurious, and most of them are imported. However, the impression they gave me was that they were vulgar and messy.
我正在向四周查看，霍桑已取出放大镜来，屈着一足，蹲下去仔细检验。他的面色非常庄肃，眼睛中也满现着好奇的异光，似暗示这件案子果真很耐寻味。那死人的面色灰白中带青。
I was looking around, and Hawthorne had taken out his magnifying glass, crouched down and examined it carefully. His face was very solemn, and his eyes were full of curiosity, which seemed to imply that this case was really intriguing. The dead man's complexion was gray with a hint of blue.
眼孔张大，狰狞可怕，青黑的嘴唇向上卷着，露出一排惨白的牙齿，齿缝中还嵌着2条金丝。这形状在白昼中看见了，也够使人毛竖；若是在冷夜静寂的当，自然更不必说。
The eyes were wide open, hideous and terrifying. The green and black lips were curled up, revealing a row of pale teeth, with 2 gold threads embedded in the gaps between the teeth. Seeing this shape in the daytime is enough to make one's hair stand on end, let alone in the silence of a cold night.
霍桑仰起头来，叫道：“姚探长，汪巡官，请瞧，这个伤痕不是很稀奇吗？”我俯身下去瞧时，见那伤痕偏在胸口的左项，白色的衬衣上已染了一小堆血渍，可是血色很淡。姚国英答道。
Hawthorne raised his head and shouted, Inspector Yao, Inspector Wang, please take a look. Isn't this scar very strange? When I leaned over to take a look, I saw that the scar was on the left side of the chest. There was a small pile of blood stains on the white shirt, but the blood was very light. Yao Guiying replied.
果真很奇怪，刚才我们只约略瞧了一瞧，还没有仔细验过。霍先生，你可有什么高见？霍桑指着伤口说：“你们瞧，这伤痕果然是被尖刀所对的，可是伤口平齐，四周又没一些血痕花纹。”
It's really strange. We just took a brief look at it and haven't examined it carefully yet. Mr. Hua, do you have any advice? Hawthorne pointed to the wound and said, Look. The wound was indeed caused by a sharp knife, but the wound was even and there were no blood marks around it.
因此，我觉得这一刀不能说就是致命的伤。矮胖的汪巡官张大了眼睛，又皱着眉峰，2只手交握着，仿佛这一点出乎他的意外。姚国英也怀疑似的说
Therefore, I feel that this knife cannot be said to be a fatal injury. The pudgy Inspector Wang opened his eyes wide, frowned, and clasped his hands together, as if this was a surprise to him. Yao Guiying also said suspiciously.
你的意思可是说另外还有致命的伤？霍桑先指着死者的嘴唇和鼻孔，又指了指窗口四周的肌肉，说：“这里都现着特殊的颜色，你们可瞧见？见过的都有青黑色。霍先生，你可是说他是？”
Are you saying there are also fatal injuries? Hawthorne first pointed to the lips and nostrils of the deceased, and then pointed to the muscles around the wound, and said, There is a special color here. Can you see it? Everyone I have seen is blue and black. Mr. Hua, you said he was.
霍桑不等姚国英说下去，接着说：“正是，这分明是中毒的迹象。你们可曾请过医生？”姚国英答道：“我们从厅里出来时，已经打电话去请许医官，大概即刻就要来了。”
Hua Sang didn't wait for Yao Guiying to continue, and then said, Exactly, this is clearly a sign of poisoning. Have you ever called a doctor? Yao Guiying replied, When we came out of the hall, we had already called to ask for Dr. Su, who will probably be here soon.
汪巡官的洋洋得意的神态改变了，他目瞪口呆地说：“这真奇怪，他还中毒。如果如此，岂不是2重谋杀？我也不觉打了一个寒噤。1重谋杀，尚觉得一团漆黑，难于着手。”
Inspector Wang's smug demeanor changed. He was stunned and said, This is so strange. He was also poisoned? If so, wouldn't it be a double murder? I also felt a shiver. A heavy murder still feels so dark that it is difficult to start.
假使果真是双重谋杀，内幕中的隐秘复杂，岂非更加棘手了吗？霍桑斜眼瞧着我，似答非答地说：“我早料这是件非常的疑案，现在果然不幸成了事实。”他又回头问姚国英道
If it is indeed a double murder, wouldn't it be even more complicated because the secret behind it is complicated? Hawthorne looked at me sideways and said vaguely, I had expected this to be a very mysterious case, but now it has unfortunately become a fact. He turned back to Yao Guiying and said,
死者马褂上的牛子本来的情形怎样？是开着的，还是扣着？姚探长说，牛子本来是一粒粒都扣上的，但那时马褂上的刀口很细，粗看几乎看不出。我们发现以后，才把牛子解开来验的。
What was the original condition of the buttons on the deceased's mantle? Is it open or closed? Inspector Yao said, the buttons are originally buttoned one by one. But at that time, the knife edge marks on the Mandarin jacket were so thin that they were almost invisible at a glance. After we discovered it, we unbuttoned it to check it.
你解牛子的时候，你的手指上可有什么血渍？没有，我的手指很洁净。那么你瞧，这2粒牛子上还染着些微血迹，但这血迹不是直接沾染的，是间接从手指上转染上去的。
When you unbuttoned, were there any blood stains on your fingers? No. My fingers are clean. Well, look. The 2 buttons were still stained with some blood. But the blood stains were not directly contaminated, but were indirectly transferred from the fingers.
不过这痕迹很细小，必须用了放大镜才能瞧见。霍桑立起身来，顺手将放大镜授给姚国英。姚国英接过了，也俯身下去瞧查。一会他扬起身子，点点头。他说：“正是，这可见凶手行凶以后。”
However, the mark is very small and requires a magnifying glass to see it. Hawthorne stood up and handed the magnifying glass to Yao Guiying. Yao Guiying took it and leaned down to take a look. After a while, he stood up and nodded. He said, exactly. This can be seen after the murderer committed the crime.
曾经动过死者的衣纽。霍桑沉吟了一下，应道：“不错，你姑且在马褂袋里摸一摸，可还有什么东西？我看那人所以要解冻衣纽，一定是为了要在死者身上搜索什么东西。”
The clothes buttons of the deceased were touched. Hawthorne pondered for a moment and responded, not bad. You tentatively felt around in the mantle bag, but there was something else. I think that the reason why the man unbuttoned his clothes must be to search for something on the deceased.
姚国英解开了马褂的牛子，伸手到袋里去摸索，一会他摸出一只式样玲珑的小金表和一个钥匙。他更向夹袍袋中摸摸，却只有一块白金和一只银质烟盒。霍桑将表接过。
Yao Guiying unbuttoned his mantle and reached into his bag to fumble. After a while, he took out a small gold watch and a key. He even dug into his robe pocket, but found only a white towel and a silver cigarette case. Hawthorne took the watch.
开了盖瞧了一瞧，说：“哎，这只表还在走呢。这钥匙是什么地方的？”他的眼光不住向室的四周瞧着。汪巡官说：“那边窗口不是有一只铁箱吗？这钥匙莫非就是铁箱上的？”
He opened the cover, took a look, and said, "Oh, this watch is still running. Where is this key?" He kept looking around the room. Inspector Wang said, "Well, isn't there an iron box at the window over there? Is this key the one on the iron box?"
他向一个窗口指一指。霍桑正也向着铁箱走去，一边走一边应道：“也许是的，姑且试一下子。”他就将钥匙投进铁箱的锁孔中去，果然相配。他把箱门旋开，向箱中瞧了一会，忽然又失望。
He pointed to a window. Hawthorne was also walking towards the iron box. As he walked, he responded, "Maybe it is. Let's try it for a while." He threw the key into the keyhole of the iron box, and it matched. He opened the door of the box and looked into the box for a while, but was suddenly disappointed again.
铁箱里是空的。他又低头想想，接着道：“虽然这情形也可以给我们一种启示。”姚国英问道：“怎么样？你以为凶手的目的就为着图财？”霍桑说：“我们姑且不必说定凶手的目的是谋财。”
The iron box is empty. He lowered his head and thought about it again, and then said, "Although, this situation can also give us a revelation." Yao Guiying asked, "How is it? Do you think the murderer's purpose is to make money?" Hawthorne said, "We don't have to say that the murderer's purpose is to make money."
但至少总有过盗窃的举动。汪巡官似乎又忍耐不住，如果财物算不得是凶手的主要目的，那么那人抱了什么目的才来行凶？霍桑似乎没有听的，走过来取了放大镜。
But at least there was always some theft. Inspector Wang seemed unable to bear it again. If property is not the murderer's main purpose, then what purpose did that person have to commit the murder? Hawthorne didn't seem to hear it and came over to get the magnifying glass.
重新回到铁箱面前，姚国英立在旁边，向汪巡官眨了一个白眼，默然不响。我乘机向室中四瞧，这书室和方才的契作室大小和位置都相同，不过契作室居客室之西，书室居客室之东。
Return to the iron box again. Yao Guiying stood beside him, rolled his eyes at Inspector Wang and remained silent. I took the opportunity to look around the room. This study room is the same size and location as the sitting room just now, but the sitting room is located to the west of the guest room, and the study room is located to the east of the guest room.
朝南向花圃的一面有2个一样窗口，在第一个窗口和那通客室的一扇门之间，就是那尸体横陈的所在。那铁箱放在靠壁第一扇窗和第二扇窗的中间，从铁箱更向东一步。
On the south side facing the garden, there are 2 identical windows. Between the first window and the door leading to the living room lay the body. The iron box was placed between the first window and the second window against the wall. Take a step further east from the iron box.
就是第二扇窗的窗口，靠窗放一只红木写字台，窗帘垂下，玻璃窗也紧紧闭着，朝东一面的窗也同样关着。我正向四面瞧查，忽听得霍桑失声惊呼，不禁使我回过头去。霍桑说：“国英兄。”
It is the window of the second window. There was a mahogany desk placed by the window, the curtains were lowered, and the glass windows were tightly closed. The window on the east side was also closed. I was looking around when I suddenly heard Hawthorne exclaim, which made me turn around. Hawthorne said, "Brother Guiying."
我看这铁箱里面一定放过财物，却被什么人乘机偷去了。果真，你从什么上见到这层？霍桑指着铁箱的门说：“你瞧，这不是有人用什么东西在箱门上抹拭过的痕迹吗？”姚国英点头道
I thought there must be some property in this iron box, but someone took the opportunity to steal it. Duck, really? Where did you see this layer? Hawthorne pointed to the door of the iron box and said, "Look, isn't this the mark that someone wiped the door with something?" Yao Guiying nodded and said,
不错，大概是凶手故意抹拭，要消灭手印，是吗？正是。我正想寻得些手印，不料那人是个老手，竟预先抹干净了。这样说，凶手倒是个有经验的家伙。霍桑应道：“对，是一个精细多智的人。”
Good. The murderer probably wiped it deliberately to eliminate the fingerprints. Yeah. Exactly. I was trying to find some fingerprints, but unexpectedly, the man was an experienced hand and wiped them clean in advance. In this way, the murderer is an experienced guy. Hawthorne responded, yes, he is a sophisticated and wise man.
我们却不能轻视。他又指着铁箱的内部说：“瞧这箱板上的痕迹，似乎死者所存放的不是银洋，却是钞票。你瞧，箱板上薄薄有一层灰尘，那里不是有几条指尖所划的乱纹吗？”
We cannot underestimate it. He then pointed to the inside of the iron box and said, look at the marks on the board of this box. It seems that what the deceased kept was not silver, but banknotes. Look, there is a thin layer of dust on the box board. Aren't there a few random lines scratched by fingertips there?
汪巡官又婉言道：“那么被盗的数目约有多少？”霍桑摇摇头：“这问题我不能答复，庭议会问问死者的母亲再说。”他顺手把铁箱的门闭上，又对姚国英道：“瞧这行迹。”
Inspector Wang added condolences. Then how much was stolen? Hawthorne shook his head. I can't answer this question. I'll stop for a while and ask the deceased's mother. He closed the door of the iron box and said to Yao Guiying, look at this trace.
似乎那人像有钢刺了一刀，随即解开他的衣纽，摸出这钥匙，开了铁箱，把箱中所有钞票取出，然后仍旧将铁箱锁上，更将钥匙还在衣袋里面，最后又扣上纽扣。
It seems that the man stabbed Yu Gang, then unbuttoned his clothes, took out the key, opened the iron box, took out all the banknotes in the box, and then locked the iron box and left the key in his pocket. And finally buttoned it up.
这种种可以想见那人的从容不迫。事毕以后，那人还能将箱门上的手印抹拭干净，更足见那人的临事不乱和布置的周密。姚国英点头道：“霍先生，你的见解真不错。”
From this, one can imagine the man's calmness. After the incident was over, the man was able to wipe the fingerprints on the door of the box clean, which further showed that the man handled the matter in a calm and thorough manner. Yao Guiying nodded and said, Mr. Hua, your opinion is really good.
因此，我又得到一个印证。你瞧，那第一扇窗的窗帘的右角不是给剪去一角了吗？我的目光随着姚国英的手指瞧向那窗帘去，窗帘的右下角果真已给剪去了一个尖角。
So I got another confirmation. Look, didn't the right corner of the curtain on the first window have a corner cut off? My eyes followed Yao Guiying's fingers to the curtain. Indeed, a sharp corner had been cut off from the lower right corner of the curtain.
约莫有2-3寸宽。霍桑耸耸肩道：“哎，国英兄，你的观察力真不错。”他回身走到第一个窗口的面前去。这窗帘的剪痕，我方才已经见过，以为是偶然的，但现在这来，我先前的见解是错误的。
It's about 2 to 3 inches wide. Hawthorne shrugged and said, Hey, Brother Guiying, your observation skills are really good. He turned around and walked to the first window. I had seen the cut marks on the curtains just now and thought they were accidental. But now, I see that my previous opinion was wrong.
他又取了放大镜，俯着身子在窗帘的剪角上细查。一会，他又说：“这窗帘的角确实是新近用剪刀剪去的。那被剪去的白纱下扩而上尖，恰成一个三角形。我瞧剪的时候。”
He took out the magnifying glass again, leaned over and examined the corners of the curtains carefully. After a while, he added, the corners of this curtain were indeed recently cut with scissors. The cut white gauze was wide at the bottom and pointed at the top, exactly forming a triangle. When I saw it, it was cut.
剪刀的封口分明是自下而上的，很奇怪。国英兄，你说的印证可是指消灭手印说的？是啊，那人染血的手指量必曾经掀动过这个窗帘，后来自己觉察了，就用剪刀剪去。霍先生，你说是不是？
The sharp edges of the scissors clearly come from the bottom up. Very strange. Brother Guiying, when you talk about confirmation, do you mean the elimination of fingerprints? Yes. The man's blood-stained fingers must have lifted the curtain before, and then he noticed it and cut it off with scissors. Mr. Hua, do you think so?
霍桑沉吟了一下，点点头，对，这一层的用意和在铁箱面上的抹拭当然没有两样。哦，这个人真细心。他用右手抚摸着他的下颏，眼睛不住地向四面流转。他又缓缓地问道。
Hawthorne pondered for a moment and nodded, yes. The purpose of this layer is of course the same as wiping on the surface of the iron box. Hey, this man is so attentive. He stroked his chin with his right hand. With his chin and eyes constantly moving in all directions, he asked slowly.
那剪下来的纱帘的一角，你们可曾看见？姚国英摇头道：“纱角我没有瞧见。”他又举起手来一指书桌，剪刀倒已经看见过，那边不是一把小剪刀。哼！霍桑的一声哼。
Have you ever seen the corner of the cut gauze curtain? Yao Guiying shook his head and said, Shajiao, I didn't see it. He raised his hand and pointed at the desk. I've seen the scissors before. Isn't that a small pair of scissors over there? Snort. Hawthorne's hum.
打断了姚国英的鱼尾。原来他的眼光早已射到写字台上，仿佛他在无意中瞧见了什么紧要的证物。查看。在三个人的恶疑之中，霍桑的敏捷的脚步霎眼早已走到了写字台旁。
interrupted the end of Yao Guiying's words. It turned out that his eyes had already shot to the writing desk, as if he had accidentally seen some important evidence. 4. Check can. Amid the astonishment of the three people, Hawthorne's quick steps had already reached the writing desk in a blink of an eye.
我们3个人都急急地跟过去。霍桑的一只手按在书桌面前的椅子背上，目光炯炯地凝注在书桌上面。我一时不知他瞧见了什么，心中暗自纳闷。
The three of us hurriedly followed. Hawthorne pressed one hand on the back of the chair in front of the desk and stared at the desk with sharp eyes. I didn't know what he saw for a while, and I secretly wondered.
因为姚国英所说的那把小巧尖头的小剪刀明明在书桌的左旁，然而霍桑所注意的似乎并不在剪刀上面。我细瞧书桌上面的东西，桌的中央有一方吸水纸的纸板，四角包着黑皮。
Because the small pair of small pointed scissors that Yao Guiying mentioned were clearly on the left side of the desk, but what Hawthorne paid attention to did not seem to be on the scissors. I looked carefully at the things on the desk. There is a square of absorbent paper in the center of the table, with the four corners wrapped in black leather.
纸板上有一支毛笔，笔的一端搁在砚台上面，砚池中还有雨水。桌的左旁有一把西式金花茶壶和一只金边白瓷茶杯，此外还有几张新闻纸和几本小说。我觉得并没有什么特别的东西。
There is a writing brush on the paperboard. One end of the brush is resting on the inkstone. There is still water in the inkstone pool. On the left side of the table are a Western-style golden flower teapot and a gold-rimmed white porcelain teacup, as well as several pieces of newsprint and several novels. I don't think there's anything special.
不知道霍桑为什么张大了眼睛，瞧得这样子出神。一会，霍桑突地旋过头来：“国英兄，这桌面上你可曾瞧过？”姚国英讷讷地答道：“瞧是瞧过一次的，可是没有瞧得仔细。”
I don't know why Hawthorne opened his eyes wide and looked so trance-like. After a while, Hawthorne suddenly turned around. Brother Guiying, have you ever seen this table? Yao Guiying replied calmly, I saw it once, but I didn't look carefully.
那么你姑且再仔细瞧瞧，可有什么可以注意的地方？霍桑又回头向我说：“包朗，你也来瞧瞧，这是一个很好的实验观察力的机会。”我偷眼瞧瞧姚国英，咬着嘴唇，紧蹙着双眉，神色很窘。
Then take a closer look. Is there anything I should pay attention to? Hawthorne turned back to me and said, Bao Lang, come and take a look. This is a great opportunity to experiment with your powers of observation. I peeked at Yao Guiying, biting her lip, frowning, looking embarrassed.
显见他对于霍桑的话完全没有把握。我也重新向书桌上细瞧，竭力要想争一口气。可是桌子上实在没有什么特殊的东西足以吸引我的视线，除了刚才叙述的几种东西以外。
It was obvious that he was completely unsure of Hawthorne's words. I also looked at the desk carefully again, trying my best to catch my breath. But there was really nothing special on the table that caught my eye. In addition to the few things just described.
还有一个白瓷笔筒，一个黄钢笔套，一只紫色水鱼，大半锭六角形的松烟墨和一枚漏转纹的白铜镇纸。这几种原来是书桌上应有的用品，那一种是霍桑所认为可以注意的呢？
There is also a white porcelain pen holder, a yellow pen cover, a purple water basin, most of the hexagonal pine smoke ink, and a white copper paperweight with seal characters engraved on it. These are the supplies that should be on the desk. Which one does Hawthorne think should be paid attention to?
难道霍桑的眼光竟能透过木板瞧见了桌子肚里的东西？姚国英说：“我瞧那支笔搁在砚子上面，并且去了笔套，砚池中又有雨水，可知是有人写过字的。”霍先生
Could it be that Hawthorne's eyes could see through the wooden board and see what was inside the table? Yao Guiying said, I saw that the pen was resting on the inkstone, and the pen cover was removed. There was still water in the inkstone pool, which showed that someone had written. Mr. Hua.
这可就是你所说的应当注意的一点。不错，这不过是一点，还有更要紧的一点。我再度用我的目力，我的眼光从毛笔上移接到渗墨纸板上面，仔细一瞧，不由不失声大叫。我道：“霍桑
Is this what you said you should pay attention to? Good. This is just one point. There is a more important point. I used my eyesight again. My eyes moved from the brush to the inked paper. When I looked carefully, I couldn't help but scream. I said, Hawthorne.
我瞧出来了，这纸板上的吸水纸，粗看果然是一色纯白的，其实中间却有一条分界，一半是雪白而新的，一半却微微带一些灰色，显见已受过几天灰尘。
I can see it. The absorbent paper on this paperboard is indeed pure white at first glance, but in fact there is a dividing line in the middle, half is snow white and new, and the other half is slightly gray, showing that it has been dusted for several days.
分明上面的一张旧吸水纸已给撕去了半张，只剩了半张了。霍桑忽大声道：“包朗，你的观察力果真有惊人的进步。从今以后，我不怕没有得力的助手里。”我不知道怎样回答。
It was clear that half of the old absorbent paper on top had been torn off, leaving only half of it. Hawthorne suddenly said loudly, Bao Lang, your observation skills have really improved amazingly. From now on, I am not afraid of not having a capable assistant. I don't know how to answer.
反而有些不好意思。 霍桑又向姚国英道：“国英兄，你明白了吗？瞧这情形，似乎有人在这里写过字，写好以后就在这张吸水纸上印过一印。这样，那字迹当然要留在吸水纸上。”
On the contrary, I felt a little embarrassed. Hawthorne said to Yao Guiying again, Brother Guiying, do you understand? Look at this situation, it seems that someone has written here. After writing, he printed it on this absorbent paper. In this way, the handwriting leave on absorbent paper of course.
后来这上面的一张吸水纸就因着有字迹的缘故被人撕去了一半，所以才露出下面一层的新吸水纸。不过那上面的一层也算不得很旧，新旧的颜色相差至微，粗看自然不容易注意。
Later, half of the piece of absorbent paper on top was torn off because of the writing on it, so the new layer of absorbent paper underneath was exposed. But the floor above is not very old. The color difference between the old and new ones is so slight that it is not easy to notice at a glance.
姚国英红了一阵脸，说：“这吸水纸的新旧，我原也瞧见的，可是我愚蠢的头脑一时不觉得有什么作用，所以不曾注意。霍先生，你想这吸水纸是谁撕去的？这虽还是个疑问，但据常理揣测。”
Yao Guiying blushed for a while and said, I have seen whether the absorbent paper is old or new. But my stupid mind didn't think it was useful at the moment, so I didn't pay attention. Mr. Hua, who do you think tore this absorbent paper? Go. Although this is still a question, it is based on common sense.
撕纸目的必是要保守什么不可告人的秘密。那么，与其说是死者自己撕的，还不如说行刺的人撕去的更加尽情些。吸水纸虽然已被凶手撕去，
The purpose of tearing the paper must be to keep some ulterior secret. So rather than saying that it was torn by the deceased himself, it would be more affectionate to say that the assassin tore it off. Although the absorbent paper has been torn off by the murderer.
还有那张原纸，可是也落到了凶手的手中去了吗？是，照眼前说，大概也已被那人取去。不过我们究竟没有仔细搜检过，还不能说定。汪巡官又忍不住地说：“但那张原纸可是死者所写的。”
Did the original piece of paper also fall into the hands of the murderer? Yes, judging by the current situation, it has probably been taken away by that person. But we haven't checked it carefully, so we can't say for sure. Inspector Wang couldn't help but say, but that original piece of paper was written by the deceased?
所写的又是什么样的性质？霍先生，你可也知道？我不知道。我们必须先查明了死者平日的行径和他的职业，然后才能够推想。姚国英道：“张有刚很有些遗产。据他的母亲说。”
What is the nature of what is written? Mr. Hua, do you also know? I have no idea. We must first find out the deceased's daily activities and his occupation before we can make any inferences. Yao Guiying said, Zhang Yugang has quite a legacy. According to his mother.
他在新兴面粉公司里当一个职员。霍桑点点头，顺手在书桌上把几张报纸取起。这是昨日的新闻报。哎，还有2张专载戏剧和花界新闻的小型报。这可以想见他平日生活的一般。
He works as a clerk in Xinxin Flour Company. Hawthorne nodded and picked up a few newspapers from the desk. This is yesterday's news. Alas, there are also 2 small newspapers dedicated to drama and flower world news. This can give you an idea of his daily life.
报纸取起了，下面还有一张粉红的小笺。霍桑又急忙将小笺取起，一张新式的请帖。我念给你们听：阳历11月3日，韦小儿伯雄与孟峰峰女士在本宅行结婚典礼，及晚敬致喜言。
The newspaper was picked up, and there was a small pink piece of paper underneath. Hawthorne quickly picked up the small note and said, a new style of invitation. I will read it to you. On November 3rd of the Gregorian calendar, the wedding ceremony of my son Bo Xiong and Ms. Meng Fengfeng will be held at our house. That evening. Jingji Happy Feast.
恭候光临，前家里鞠躬。习舍本宅汉口路永乐里5号。霍桑念完了，凝目想了一想，国英兄，方才你问话的时候，那张太太不是说一的儿子昨晚上吃过喜酒的吗？是的，今天是4日。
Looking forward to visiting you. The Qian family bowed. The banquet will be at our home, number 5 Yongla Lane, Hangkou Road. Hawthorne finished reading and thought for a moment, Brother Guiying, when you asked me just now, didn't Mrs. Zhang say that Yi Sun had a wedding banquet last night? Yes, today is the 4th.
昨天他一定就是吃钱家的喜酒。这样看，也许可以合得上你的中毒的见解。这请帖却有重视的价值。我暗想，有刚果真是中毒的吗？如果如此，加这行刺的确证，分明真是双重谋杀。
He must have been enjoying the Qian family's wedding wine yesterday. Looking at it this way, it may fit your view of poisoning. This invitation is indeed of great value. I secretly wondered whether Congo was really poisoned. If so, and with the conclusive evidence of the murder, it was clearly a double murder.
这又怎么办？这2重谋杀是不是一人所为？或者有2个凶手？若是一个凶手，既下了毒，为什么再要行刺？倘或是2个凶手，那就疑团重重，更加难办。霍桑对于这案能否胜任？
So what? Were these 2 murders committed by one person? Or were there 2 murderers? If it was a murderer and he had already been poisoned, why would he want to stab him again? If there are two murderers, then there will be many doubts and it will be even more difficult to solve. Is Hawthorne competent for this case?
也就说不定了。霍桑像在竭力运用他的嗅觉，他低下头去，在写字桌旁瞧了一瞧。他呼道：“他还呕吐过呢，这痰盂中就是他呕吐的东西。你们可觉得吗？痰盂是一种可憎的器皿。”
Maybe. Hawthorne seemed to be straining his sense of smell. He lowered his head and looked at the desk. He shouted, he even vomited. This spittoon is the stuff he vomited. Do you think it? A spittoon is an abominable vessel.
我本不愿意瞧，但因霍桑的间接的暗示，自然而然的有一股难受的酒酸气味冲进我的鼻孔。姚国英说，中毒的见解又多了一种印证力。霍桑抬起头来，向窗口外一望，叫道：“国英兄。”
I didn't want to look at it, but because of Hawthorne's indirect suggestion, an unpleasant smell of sour wine rushed into my nostrils. Yao Guiying said, there is another kind of confirmation for the idea of poisoning. Hawthorne raised his head, looked out the window, and shouted, Brother Guiying.
有一辆汽车，大概是你们厅里的许继仁医官来了。姚国英应了一声，便匆匆出去迎接。一会，他领着一个身材短小、穿西装的中年人进来，彼此招呼了一声，便一同到室旁来查看。
There is a car. It's probably Su Jiren, the medical officer in your hall, who is here. Yao Guiying responded and hurried out to greet him. After a while, he led a short middle-aged man in a suit. After greeting each other, they went to the corpse to inspect it.
许医官放下了带来的一只皮包，搂着身子在尸身上验看。一会他才慢慢的立直。姚国英又把方才和霍桑所谈的意见约略的向他说了一遍。许医官说：“就外表看。”
Medical officer Su put down a leather bag he had brought with him and crouched down to examine the body. After a while, he slowly stood up straight. Yao Guiying briefly stated to him the opinions he had just discussed with Hawthorne. Medical officer Su said, judging from the appearance.
这个人8%已有中毒的痕迹，但究竟怎样，还得等检察官到来后，经过仔细的检验才能断定。霍桑道：“我还得请许先生证明一个疑点，死者如果是中毒，是不是因毒致命？”
8 out of 10 times this person has signs of poisoning. But what exactly will happen can only be determined after the prosecutor arrives and undergoes careful examination. Hawthorne said, I have to ask Mr. Su to prove a doubt. If the deceased was poisoned, was it fatal due to poison?
还是被尖刀所杀，这一点要请你指教。霍先生，太客气。等我检验之后，一定把结果报告你。医官立直了，向舒适四周瞧看，似乎要寻什么东西。霍桑问道
Still killed by a sharp knife, I want your advice on this point. Mr. Hua, you're too polite. After I test it, I will report the results to you. The medical officer stood up straight and looked around the study room, as if he was looking for something. Hawthorne asked.
许先生是不是要寻些检验的材料？是啊，凡查验中毒的人，同时必须搜罗些饮料、食物和茶壶、酒杯之类的应用器具，以便可以追究毒物的来由。我早替你寻得一种了，在这里呢。
Is Mr. Su looking for some inspection materials? Yes. Anyone who is checking for poisoning must also collect some drinks, food, and utensils such as teapots and glasses, so that the source of the poison can be traced. I have already found one for you. Here it is.
霍桑微笑地说着，引他走到书桌面前，指着那只黄铜痰盂给他瞧。医官说：“他曾呕过的，这真是重要的东西，应当带回去。”他回过头来，瞧见了书桌的茶壶，随手揭开了茶壶的盖。
Hawthorne said with a smile, leading him to the desk and pointing to the brass spittoon. The medical officer said, oh, he had vomited it. This is really important and should be taken back. He turned around, saw the teapot on the desk, and casually opened the lid of the teapot.
这还是满满的一壶茶呢，大概是红茶吧。霍桑和我也伸过头去看，我细瞧那浮着的厚厚一层茶叶，果真是红茶。医官又说，无论如何，我总得带些去检验。
This is still a full pot of tea. Probably black tea. Hawthorne and I also stretched our heads to take a look. I took a closer look at the thick layer of floating tea leaves, and it turned out to be black tea. The medical officer added, no matter what, I have to bring some for examination.
许医官从衣袋中摸出一个小玻璃瓶来，随即取起茶壶，在茶杯中注了半杯，又从茶杯中装入玻璃瓶里。接着他把玻璃瓶塞紧了，纳入袋中。他说：“姚探长，我先回去报告。”
Dr. Su took out a small glass bottle from his pocket, then picked up the teapot, poured half a cup into the teacup, and then put it into the glass bottle from the teacup. Then he corked the glass bottle tightly and put it into the bag. He said, Inspector Yao, I will go back and report first.
以便检察官早些来，我可以帮同查验。这个痰盂，请你派个弟兄送回署里去。查验的结果怎么样，我再通知你。姚国英应道：“很好，我等你的信息。”许医师拿了皮包，回身要出去。
So that the prosecutor can come earlier and I can help you with the inspection. Please send a brother to take this spittoon back to the office. I will let you know what the results of the inspection are like. Yao Guiying responded, very good. I'm waiting for your message. Dr. Su took the leather bag and turned to go out.
霍桑呼止住他，许先生，对不起。还有一点，尸身上如果有什么可以注意的地方，也请你通知一声。我们只在他的外面瞧过一瞧，还没有仔细验看过里。5. 分工。许继仁医官出去之后
Hawthorne suddenly stopped him. Mr. Su, I'm sorry. One more thing, if there is anything we need to pay attention to on the body, please let us know. We only took a look at his outside and haven't examined it carefully yet. 5. Division of labor. After medical officer Su Jiren left.
霍桑提议我们4个人分头工作。姚国英再去问问死者的母亲，所问的题目有4：一儿子的银箱中存住的银钱有多少？2. 一说过死者曾经有过纳妾的意思，这时的情形究竟如何？3.
Hawthorne suggested that the 4 of us work separately. Yao Guiying went to ask the deceased's mother again, and asked 4 questions. 1. How much money was stored in Yi's son's silver box? 2nd, Yi said that the deceased had the intention of taking a concubine. What exactly is the situation? 3.
一儿子所交的朋友最熟悉的约有几个？4. 当凶案发觉以后，金寿急往把子路严家去报信，那时候他们母女俩和女仆王妈等在什么地方，并且书室和大门是否另有看守的人？
How many friends does Yi's son have the most familiar with? 4. After the murder was discovered, Jin Shou immediately went to target Lian's house to report the news. Where were the mother and daughter and the maid Wang Ma waiting at that time? And are there other guards in the library and the door?
霍桑自己担任的是到门房里去查问金寿，因为据他的意见，金寿在这件案中时处于重要的地位。我和汪巡官负责在屋的内外仔细查验，以便寻得些线索或发现什么凶手的来踪去迹。
Hawthorne himself was responsible for going to the concierge to inquire about Jin Shou. Because according to his opinion, Jin Shou actually plays an important role in this case. Inspector Wang and I were responsible for carefully checking the inside and outside of the house in order to find some clues or discover the whereabouts of the murderer.
商议既定，4个人便立即分头去干。我等霍桑和姚国英走了出去，又和汪希年巡官再分一分。汪巡官去查看屋的外部，我却在尸室中搜检。汪巡官赞同了走出去，我就也在室中动手。
After the discussion was settled, the 4 people immediately split up to work. I waited for Huasang and Yao Guiying to go out, and then we had another break with Inspector Wang Xinian. Inspector Wang went to look at the outside of the house, while I searched the corpse room. Inspector Wang agreed and went out, and I started to do it in the room.
尸室中的地板虽然是广漆的，但这时候足印纵横，休想辨得清楚。我在墙隅边角仔细瞧了一会，没有可疑的东西。我理想中的窗帘上剪下来的纱角、撕下来的渗墨纸和凶刀等等。
Although the floor in the corpse room was painted, there were so many footprints that it was impossible to distinguish them clearly. I looked carefully at the corner of the wall for a while, but there was nothing suspicious. The corners of yarn cut off from my ideal curtain, the ink-stained paper torn off, the murderous knife, etc.
更是没有踪影。我又瞧那3个窗口，朝南第1个窗口开着一扇窗，窗帘也剪去了一角。我已经说过，第2扇写字台前的窗，窗栓紧紧地拴着，毫无遗迹。还有第3扇朝东的窗，虽然关着。
There is no trace. I looked at the 3 windows again. The first window facing south is open, and the curtains are cut off, as I have already said. The second window in front of the desk is bolted tightly, leaving no trace, and the third window faces, although the east window is closed.
却须合着没有下栓，这窗口可曾是凶手出入的通道？可是更一细查，又自笑我的鲁莽。这窗口是沿通路的，设备也和朝南的2扇不同。那玻璃窗外还隔着铁条，凶手当然不能出进。
But it is closed and there is no bolt. Could this window have been the entrance and exit of the murderer? But upon closer inspection, I laughed at myself for my recklessness. This window is along the passage, and its equipment is different from the 2 windows facing south. There were iron bars across the glass window, so of course the murderer couldn't get in or out.
我开了窗摸摸铁条，根根都不能摇动。我更仰起头来瞧瞧，窗外是一条小弄，对窗有一堵白色的砖墙，墙里面似乎是人家的天井。无论如何，这窗口绝技不能认作通道。
I opened the window and touched the iron bars, but they couldn't shake at all. I raised my head and took a look. There was a small alley outside the window, and there was a white brick wall opposite the window. Inside the wall seemed to be someone's patio. In any case, this window must not be regarded as a passage.
3扇窗都没有发展的余地，我就再从书桌上着眼。桌面上的东西，霍桑等已经验过，无需我再去研究了。我将书桌靠左的一只抽屉抽开，翻了一会，没有什么重要的东西。
There is no room for development in the 3 windows, so I will focus on the desk again. Hawthorne and others have already experienced the things on the table, so there is no need for me to study them further. I opened a drawer on the left side of the desk and rummaged through it for a while, but there was nothing important.
又伸手去开右边一只，不料锁着。这当若要寻钥匙开启，未免费事，并且也不容易办到。因为这抽屉的钥匙也许在死者的身上，方才霍桑基因检察官没有到场，不能擅自搜索。
He reached out to open the one on the right, but it was locked. At this time, it is not free to find the key to open it, and it is not easy to do. Because the key to the drawer may be on the deceased's body, Hawthorne could not search without permission because the prosecutor was not present.
我自然更不便去翻动死尸，于是我取出便用刀来，着手撬那抽屉的锁。不费多大的力，抽屉就给撬开了，便见有一个银行存折和几本风行的所谓言情小说。
Naturally, it is even more inconvenient for me to turn over a dead body. So I took it out and used a knife to pick the lock of the drawer. Without much effort, the drawer was pried open, revealing a bank book and several popular so-called erotic novels.
此外还有不少跑马票和大小不等的照片，照片都是时装的少女。我把小说取出来，顺手一翻，忽见书中另外夹着一张用透明纸裹着的照片，照片上也是一个女子，年纪还不满20。
In addition, there are many horse racing tickets and photos of various sizes. The photos are all of girls in fashionable clothes. I took out the novel and flipped through it, and suddenly I saw another photo wrapped in transparent paper in the book. There is also a woman in the photo, less than 20 years old.
装束像一个小家碧玉，相貌也还不错。我暗想，这照片既然特别重视，一定是有关系的。我又发现另一本书中有一张中式海月信笺，上面写着几行墨笔的草字。我急忙取出信笺来，念道
She is dressed like a Zyajia and looks pretty good. I secretly thought that since I attached so much importance to this photo, it must be related. I also found a piece of Chinese-style Haiyue letterhead in another book, with a few lines of cursive calligraphy written on it. I quickly took out the letter and read.
我写这封信给你，本来是很冒昧的，但你我同是商界中人，而且你又是很体面的，所以我特地通告你一声。你的夫人的行动近来似乎不很正经，跳舞场和游戏场里时时见一的踪迹。
It is very presumptuous of me to write this letter to you. But you and I are both in the business world, and you are very respectable, so I specially inform you. Your wife's behavior seems not to be very serious lately. She is often seen in dance halls and game fields.
昨天晚上，我看见一和一个男子一同在大华戏院里瞧戏，这是我眼见的。你应得留一些才是。如果再放出去，那就……信写到这里，忽然中断了。信上的字迹很草，并且有2个字经过涂改。
Last night, I saw E and a man watching a show at the Taiwa Theater together. This is what I saw. You should pay more attention. If it is released again, then. The letter suddenly stopped here. The handwriting on the letter was very cursory, and 2 words had been altered.
我一时想不出那信有什么作用，是草稿吗？还是录下来的副本？又是谁写的？信中所说的夫人是不是死者有刚的夫人，或是有刚称呼他人的？我正在痴想的时候
I couldn't think of the purpose of that letter at the moment. Is it a draft? Or a recorded copy? Who wrote it again? Is the lady mentioned in the letter the deceased Yu Gang's wife? Or have you just addressed someone else? When I was daydreaming.
忽听得江巡官在窗外招呼：“包先生，请出来瞧，这里有一个紧要的政绩呢。”他的报告相当郑重，大概他已经发现了什么。我忙着拿了照片信稿走到外面，看见汪巡官在第一个窗口外面。
Suddenly I heard Inspector Jiang greeting me outside the window. Mr. Bao, please come out and take a look. There is an important evidence here. His report was quite solemn, and he probably had discovered something. I hurriedly took the photos and letters and walked outside, and saw Inspector Wang outside the first window.
他的惊异的眼光正凝住着窗口下面的草地上。他捻了捻他的短须，很得意地说：“包先生，你瞧，这不是半个足印吗？”我走近瞧时，果然有半个很深的足印。我说：“正是，这个发现很重要。”
His surprised eyes were fixed on the grass below the window. He twirled his short beard and said proudly, "Mr. Bao, look, isn't this half a footprint?" When I took a closer look, I saw that there was indeed a very deep footprint. I said, "Exactly, this discovery is very important."
这是个男子的足印，像有一个人仰踮着足尖向窗内窥探，所以他的全身的重量都偏在他的足尖上面，印就也留得特别深。汪巡官越发得意，连连点着头，表示很赞同我的意见。
Well, these are the footprints of a man. It looks like a man standing on tiptoes, peering into the window, so the weight of his whole body is leaning on his toes, and the prints are very deep. Inspector Wang became more and more proud and nodded repeatedly, expressing his agreement with my opinion.
他还假定那足印就是凶手所留下的。我对于这一点还不敢附和，但把发现的照片和信纸告诉他听，他也非常惊喜，以为这些都是破案的要证。这时我们的执思大体完毕。
He also assumed that the footprints were those left by the murderer. I didn't dare to agree with this point, but I told him the photos and letter paper I found. He was also very pleasantly surprised, thinking that these were the necessary evidence to solve the case. At this time our task is basically completed.
就一同去找寻霍桑，霍桑还在门房里和金兽问答。我不便进去惊扰，就拉住了汪巡官，一同站在门外听里面的谈话。霍桑问道：“你说你主人好似有害怕什么人的情形？”
Let's go find Hawthorne together. Hawthorne was still questioning Jean Shou in the concierge. It was inconvenient for me to go in and disturb him, so I grabbed Inspector Wang and stood outside the door together, listening to the conversation inside. Hawthorne asked, "You said that your master seems to be afraid of someone."
可是到了昨天晚上才有这样的表示。金寿道：“不是，这模样已经有了3-4个礼拜。不过昨天晚上他回来的特别早，并且仔细叮嘱我将前后门关好。他的畏惧的状态更觉得显露一些。”
But last night, there was such an expression. Jean Shou said, "No. It's been like this for 3 or 4 weeks. But he came back very early last night and carefully told me to close the front and back doors. His fearful state felt more exposed."
你说他回来之后一脚走进书房，你怎么知道？我在大门上下锁的时候，瞧见书室中电灯斑亮。其实他夜夜如此，回来后总要在书房里看一会报，然后才上去睡。他的卧室在那一面。
You said that after he came back, he walked into the study. How do you know? While I was locking the door, I saw the light in the study room turn on. In fact, he does this every night. After coming back, he always reads the newspaper in the study for a while before going to bed. Which side is his bedroom on?
可是在正屋的钟楼上。不是，钟楼是太太的卧房，西楼是小姐的房，少爷的房就在东边的书房楼上。昨天晚上他可曾上过楼？我不知道。我关了大门就回进来睡了。
But on the upper floor of the main house? No. The middle floor is the wife's bedroom. The west building is the lady's room. The young master's room is upstairs in the study on the east side. Did he go upstairs last night? I have no idea. I closed the door and went back in to sleep.
你睡的时候可曾听得过什么声音？听得的是少爷的声音。怎么样的声音？起先只有些拍桌骂人的话，后来好似喝呼起来。你听得骂什么人？我没有听清楚。不过少爷常常一个人会骂人。
Have you ever heard any sounds while sleeping? What you can hear is the young master's voice. What's the sound like? At first there were just some slaps on the table and curse words, but later it seemed like they were shouting. Who can you hear scolding? I didn't hear clearly. But the young master often scolds others alone.
骂起来又是粗恶的很，我也学不出口。室中忽然静寂了。汪巡官向我点点头，暗示这番话对于案情上也有开展感到高兴。我用同样的方式答复他，依旧屏息地站着。
The scolding was very rough and vicious, and I couldn't learn to say it. The room suddenly fell silent. Inspector Wang nodded to me, indicating that he was happy that these words had made progress on the case. I replied to him in the same way, still standing breathlessly.
一会门房中的语声又继续了。霍桑说：“金寿，你应当实说。我瞧你的面色，明明有什么事隐瞒着不告诉我。如果如此，你不但误人家的事，还要误你自己哩。”金寿凄凄地说：“我。”
After a while, the voice in the concierge continued. Hawthorne said, "Jean Shou, you should tell the truth. I can see from your face that you are hiding something from me. If so, you will not only mislead others, but also mislead yourself." Jean Shouqi said, "I."
我还听得一种喊声，仿佛少爷，他曾叫过我。哎，你怎么样？可曾答应他？没有。我已经睡在床上。什么？主人叫你，你为什么不答应？又静一静。这时门房中的空气一定很紧张。
I also heard a shout, as if the young master, he had called me. "Hey, how are you? Have you ever promised him?" No. I was already asleep in bed. What? The master called you, why didn't you agree? Another moment of silence. The air in the concierge must have been tense at this time.
我和汪希年仍默然相对。霍桑说：“说啊，你可是明明知道你主人正被人谋害，故而害怕不起来，要不然你也太懒惰了。”金寿的粗壮的语声忽似带着颤动：“先生，不是我懒惰，
Wang Xinian and I still faced each other in silence. Hawthorne said, "Tell me. You clearly know that your master is being murdered, so you can't be afraid? Otherwise, you are too lazy." Jean Shou's thick voice suddenly seemed to be trembling. "Sir, no, it's not that I'm lazy. I dash. Huh."
不是懒惰是什么？你怎么吞吞吐吐？先生，有缘故的。少爷喝酒之后往往如此。有一次，他在书房里乱叫乱骂，还打碎了一块玻璃和一把茶壶。我吃了一下，奔进去瞧。
What is it but laziness? Why are you hesitating? Sir, there is a reason. The young master often behaves like this after drinking. Once, he yelled and cursed in the study and broke a piece of glass and a teapot. I was startled and ran in to take a look.
原来他一个人在那里发酒疯，我给他打了一拳，我吓怕了，所以昨夜里也不敢随便进去。后来我快要睡着了，忽然听得小姐的呼声，才爬起来奔进去。少爷已经倒在地上了。
It turned out that he was drunk and crazy there alone. I punched him. I was scared, so I didn't dare to go in casually last night. Later, I was about to fall asleep, and suddenly I heard the young lady's call, so I got up and ran in. The young master has fallen to the ground.
那时候你就知道你主人已经被人杀死了。杀死不杀死，我没有觉得。我只走进去一摸，觉得他的呼吸已断。我们慌得没有办法。后来我叫王妈把小姐和太太们送上了楼去。
You will know then that your master has been killed. Kill or not, I don't think so. I just walked closer and touched him, and I felt that his breathing had stopped. We were so panicked that we had no choice. Later I asked Ma Wang to send the young lady and ladies upstairs.
接着我便到少奶家去报信，但那时候太太吩咐我不许说明白，只说少爷醉倒了。你去报信的时候是从这大门出去的。是的，你出去后大门怎么样？可有人带你看守？没有，我只把门虚掩着。
Then I went to the young lad's house to report the news. But at that time, my wife told me not to explain clearly, but to say that the young master was drunk. When you went to report the news, did you go out through this gate? Yes. How is the gate after you go out? Is there someone to watch over you? No. I just kept the door ajar.
我刚才已告诉先生，包车夫奎林在上月里辞歇了，打杂的阿荣又因着他的妈害病，在昨天傍晚回家去，所以没有人可以带我。你回来时大门又怎么样？依旧虚掩着，没有两样。
I just told my husband that Kuelin, the coachman, resigned last month, and Aaron, the handyman, went home yesterday evening because his mother was ill, so there was no one to take my place. What will happen to the gate when you come back? Still hiding it, no different.
霍桑略顿一顿，又问：昨晚你主人什么时候回来？后来又到什么时候发案？我只记得少爷回来时约在10点钟左右。后来我到少奶家里去报信，没有留意时刻。
Hawthorne paused for a moment, then asked, When did your master come back last night? When did the crime happen? I only remember that it was around 10 o'clock when the young master came back. Later, I went to the young mistress's house to report the news, but I didn't pay attention to the time.
但从少奶家出门回转的时候已经打12点钟，问答停歌了。我听得霍桑在门房里用手指弹着桌面。秋阳的余威还不弱，我浑身浸在他的溶液中，觉得有些热。
But it was already 12 o'clock when I left the young lady's house and returned. The question and answer paused. I heard Hawthorne tapping his fingers on the table in the concierge. The lingering power of the autumn sun was not weak yet. I was soaked in its solution and felt a little hot.
汪希年也在用手巾抹他的肥润的额角。一会，霍桑又换了一个题目：你主人的朋友一定不少，是不是？金寿毫不留顿地答道：是，真不少。以前江少爷常在这里出现，还有于少爷、郑少爷。
Wang Xinian was also wiping his plump forehead with a handkerchief. After a while, Hawthorne changed the topic again. Your master must have a lot of friends, right? Jean Shou replied without hesitation, Yes, there are quite a few. In the past, Master Jiang often came and went here. There were also Masters Yu and Master Zheng.
还有个叫小马，一个叫老刘，还有个女戏子叫小金花。霍桑插口说：哦，一个女戏子，一常来这里。是，不过近来这班人都不来了。最近几个礼拜简直没有人上门。那么这几个星期中
There is also a girl named Xiao Ma, a girl named Lao Lu, and a female actor named Xiao Jinhua. Hawthorne said, Oh, a female actor? Yi Chang comes here? Yes, but these people have stopped coming recently. There has been literally no one coming to the door in recent weeks. So in the past few weeks.
你可曾见有什么可疑的人们在你家门前走动？这个很难说。若说行路的人在门口探探望望，那是不时有的。我的意思，要知道可有什么人逗留在附近，或曾向你探听口气。
Have you ever seen any suspicious people walking in front of your house? This it's hard to say. If a traveler visits you at the door. That happens from time to time. What I mean is, you want to know if there is anyone hanging around or asking you about your tone.
金寿停一停，好像追想什么，接着答道：哎，我记得大前天下午有一个人进来问我少爷可在家里，我回答他不在。他又问少爷什么时候回来，我说不一定，大概总在夜半。
Jean Shou paused for a moment, as if he was thinking about something, and then replied, Well, I remember the day before yesterday, in the afternoon, a man came in and asked me if the young master was at home. I answered that he was not there. He also asked when the young master would come back, and I said not sure. Probably always in the middle of the night.
那人好像很不高兴。霍桑的声调仿佛增加些注意。那个人怎么样打扮？你可认识？不，我从前没有看见过。衣服是穿中装的，我已记不清楚。我觉得那人戴一副秃鹰的眼镜，不像是下流人。
The man seemed unhappy. Hawthorne's tone seemed to be more attentive. How does that person dress? Do you recognize it? No, I haven't seen it before. The clothes were mid-range clothes. I can't remember clearly. I think that man wears a pair of convex glasses, so he doesn't look like a dirty person.
你事后可曾告诉你主人？没有，因为我当时并不在意，过后便忘怀了。那么你白天可一直在这门房里吗？ 还是时常要走开的？不，我一直在这里，只有吃饭的时候，我到里面厨房里去搬饭。
Did you tell your master afterwards? No. Because I didn't care at the time and forgot about it later. Then you will always be in this concierge during the day? Or do you always have to walk away? No, I've been here all the time. Only when I'm eating, I go inside to the kitchen to carry the food.
但时候也不多。此外，除非有客人来，我进去通报，暂时离开门房。昨天午后，可有来客叫你到里边去通报过？没有。有的。什么？昨天下午4点钟光景，有个穿西装的高个来问少爷在不在。
But there isn't much time. In addition, unless there are guests coming, I go in to announce and leave the concierge temporarily. Were there any visitors who asked you to report inside yesterday afternoon? No, well, there is. What? At 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, a tall man in a suit came to ask if the young master was there.
我没有给他通报。为什么？你主人不在家。不，少爷在家里，可是我听得他正在跟少奶吵嘴。我有些怕，所以我回答那客人不在家，没有进去通报。后来你也没有告诉你主人？没有，我。
I didn't inform him. Why? Is your master not at home? No, the young master is at home, but I heard him arguing with the young grandma. I was a little scared, so I answered that the guest was not at home and did not go in to inform him. You didn't tell your master later? No, I.
我实在怕他。这个客人你认识吗？不认识，不过我看见过他一次。上礼拜他来看过少爷，少爷陪着他一块出去。我不知道他姓什么，叫什么。昨天还有别的客人吗？没有了。
I'm really afraid of him. Do you know this guest? I don't know him, but I saw him once. He visited the young master last week, and the young master went out with him. I don't know his last name or his name. Were there any other guests yesterday? There is none left.
不过在晚饭的当，我照例往厨房中去了一次。那时候你主人可在家里？不在，他又出去了。我听说傍晚时分，你家少奶曾和你主人吵闹过，怎么会不在？吵嘴是在4点钟后。
But during dinner, I went to the kitchen as usual. Is your master at home at that time? Not here. He went out again. I heard that your mistress had a quarrel with your master in the evening. Why wasn't she there? The quarrel was after 4 o'clock.
少爷在4点光景回来，不知怎地又和少奶吵起来，吵了一场，他又匆匆出去。接着少奶也回忆的母家去，所以在傍黑的时候，少爷又不在家。你可知道那时候你主人往那里去的？知道的。
The young master came back at 4 o'clock, and for some reason he started to quarrel with the young mistress again. After a quarrel, he hurried out again. Then, the young lady also went back to Yi's mother's house. So when it was dark, the young master was not at home. Do you know where your master went at that time? I know.
太太早一天说过，昨晚上少爷要到汉口路钱家去吃喜酒。他出去时穿的也是新衣裳。但你主人晚上回来时，你可知道他是不是确实吃过喜酒？是，他确实喝过酒。
My wife said the day before that the young master was going to have a wedding banquet at Qian's house on Hankow Road last night. He also wore new clothes when he went out. But when your master comes back in the evening, do you know whether he has indeed had a wedding banquet? Yes, he did drink.
因为他叮嘱我把前后门关好的时候，我还觉得他的嘴里酒气直冲。霍桑停了一停，说道：“好了，现在你好好的看守大门，如果有别的事，回头再问你。”霍桑走出门房的时候
Because when he told me to close the front and back doors, I felt the smell of alcohol coming out of his mouth. Hawthorne paused and said, "Okay. Now you guard the gate well. I'll ask you later if I have anything else." When Hawthorne walked out of the porter's room,
汪巡官便挺挺腰走近去点头招呼。他分明认为他发掘的足印在全案上占着重要的地位，故而急不容缓地要把他所发现的成绩报告霍桑。可事事不凑巧。
Inspector Wang straightened his back and walked closer, nodding and greeting. He clearly believed that the footprints he found played an important role in the whole case, so he couldn't wait to report the results he found to Hawthorne. But it didn't happen by chance.
这时候，姚国英正也从里面匆匆出来。他一见霍桑，便抢先开口陈说他问话的结果。他已问过死者的母亲，据说有刚的朋友很多，但绝少冤家。若要仔细，可去问面粉公司里的朋友。
At this time, Yao Guiying also hurriedly came out. As soon as he saw Hawthorne, he spoke first and told the results of his questioning. He has already asked the mother of the deceased. It is said that Yu Gang has many friends but few enemies. If you want to be more careful, you can ask friends in the flour company.
关于纳妾的事，虽然谈过一回，可是因着他的妻舅做过县知事的严小山的反对和他的妻子严协英的阻挡，没有成功。昨晚发案以后，张母和孝勤到了楼上，都吓得什么似的，各自归房。
Although the matter of taking concubines was discussed once, it failed due to the opposition of his wife's uncle, Yan Shaoshan, who was the county magistrate, and the obstruction of his wife, Yan Jiaying. After the crime happened last night, Zhang's mother and Shao Qin went upstairs. They were both frightened and went back to their rooms.
直到金寿领了严谐英回来，母女俩才同王妈下楼。至于铁箱内的银钱数目，他母亲完全不知道，因为有刚的四父张世勋在临死时的时候，除了张母的一部分养老费以外，
It wasn't until Jean Shou brought Yan Shuiying back that mother and daughter went downstairs with Wang Ma. As for the amount of money in the iron box, his mother had no idea. Because when Yougang's heir, Zhang Shixuan, was dying, except for part of Zhang's mother's pension,
已将遗产平均分给兄妹两个，所以有刚分内的财产只有他一个人掌管，家中人都不知道底细。霍桑听姚国英说完，说：“那么银钱的数目在这里是问不出的了。”
The inheritance has been divided equally between the two siblings. Therefore, he was the only one in charge of the property that was just his share, and no one in his family knew the details. After listening to Yao Guiying's words, Hua Sang said, "Then, the amount of money cannot be asked here."
我并不是有意和汪希年争先，但谈话的题目已关涉我的任务，便再度剥夺了他的发言机会。我插口说：“我知道，至少是1500元。”汪希年向我眨着白眼。
I didn't mean to compete with Wang Xinian first, but the topic of the conversation was related to my mission, so I once again deprived him of the opportunity to speak. I interjected, "I know. At least $1,500. Wang Xinian rolled his eyes at me.
姚国英也抬起他诧异的眼光向我呆瞧。霍桑立即问道：“包朗，你可是发现了什么证据？”是，我寻得一个银行存折，他昨天在沪江银行里提出了1500元。
Yao Guiying also raised his surprised eyes and stared at me blankly. Hawthorne immediately asked, "Bao Lang, what evidence did you find?" "Yes. I found a bank book. He withdrew 1,500 yuan from Hujiang Bank yesterday."
我就将在书桌抽屉里得到的存折和照片、信件等物都拿出来给霍桑和姚国英看，他们都承认照片和信件非常重要。姚国英将这证物收藏好，这当急坏了汪希年巡官。
I took out all the passbooks, photos, letters, and other items I got from the desk drawer and showed them to Hawthorne and Yao Guiying. They both admit that photos and letterhead are very important. Yao Guiying collected the evidence. Inspector Wang Xinian was very anxious at this moment.
他在忍无可忍之后，终于不甘v缄默。他大声说：“那边还有一个凶手的足印呢。”他的报告是用着郑重方式发表的，虽曾引起姚国英的惊异的一瞬，但霍桑却只淡淡地点一点头。
After he couldn't bear it anymore, he finally refused to remain silent. He said loudly, "There are still footprints of a murderer over there." His report was delivered in a solemn manner. Although Yao Guiying was surprised for a moment, Hawthorne only nodded lightly.
似乎不以为意。我倒反替汪巡官有些难堪。霍桑旋过头来，答道：“那足印不是在那发案室的第一个窗口外面吗？这个刚才我也已瞧见，是的，却很重要。不过汪先生就认作是凶手的足印。”
He seemed unfazed. On the contrary, I felt a little embarrassed for Inspector Wang. Hawthorne turned around and replied, "Isn't that footprint outside the first window of the crime room? I saw this just now. Yes, it is indeed very important." But Mr. Wang recognized it as the murderer. Footprints.
如果没有别的证明，似乎还嫌太早些儿。自然，这批评会使那胖子大大的扫兴。但解救他的两眼交替眨而口吃无言的窘态的，也还是霍桑。他说：“好吧，我们回进去坐一坐。”
If there is no other proof, it seems too early. Naturally, this criticism would greatly disappoint the fat man. But it was Hawthorne who saved his embarrassment of blinking alternately and stuttering that, he said, "Okay. Let's go back and sit down."
商量一个办法，才可以着手侦缉凶手。6. 两重谋杀。我们在课室中把彼此的成绩交换过以后，又商议了一会，就假定这是一件复杂幻密的谋杀案，而且是两重谋杀，一是中毒。
Discuss a way to start detecting the murderer. 6. Double murder. After we exchanged the results with each other in the living room and discussed it for a while, we assumed that this was a complicated and mysterious murder case, and it was a double murder. One is poisoning.
一是刀刺，凶手有两个，动机也许是个别。据霍桑单独的见解，有刚不但中毒，却还是因毒而死的。为着法律上的佐证，故而他曾请许继仁医官特别重视这一点。至于有刚被害的原因，
One is stabbing. There are two murderers, and their motives may be different. According to Hawthorne's independent opinion, Gang was not only poisoned, but also died from the poison. For legal support, he asked medical officer Su Jiren to pay special attention to this point. As for the reason why he was just killed,
就毒与刀两方面推测，有如下几种可能：下毒的屋内人、屋外人都有可能。屋外人的注意点自然在吃喜酒的钱家方面。屋内人除了仆役们因着死者的脾气太坏受了怨屈因损报复以外，
as for the poison and the knife, there are several possibilities. The person who poisoned the house could be someone inside or outside the house. The attention of people outside the house is naturally on the Qian family having a wedding banquet. The people in the house, except for the servants, had suffered grievances and revenge because of the deceased's bad temper.
他的妻子严谐英最有嫌疑。 据我们所知，夫妻间并不和睦，并且一的装饰非常时髦，行动又的确是非常自由的。还有书桌抽屉中发现的那一封信，很像是有人写给有刚的匿名信。
His wife Yan Jiaying is the most suspect. As far as we know, there was no harmony between the couple, and Yi's decoration was very fashionable and her movements were indeed very free. And the letter found in the desk drawer looked very much like an anonymous letter someone wrote to Yu Gang.
有刚特地露出一份，准备有什么作用？第二，论形似一点，瞧了有刚的打扮和他书桌上的小报，他的和女灵来往，夹着抽屉里书中夹着的那些女子照片，显见他是一个好色之徒。
You just made a special recording to see what effect it would have. Second, when it comes to murder, I saw Yogang's attire in the tabloids on his desk, his contacts with actresses, and the photos of women in the books in the drawer. It is obvious that he is a womanizer.
同时他又是个酗酒的赌徒，他近来又有畏惧什么人的表示。若是假定他因着争风吃醋，外面有什么冤家或情敌，那也是有可能性的。此外，或是有什么人因财起意，例如那辞谢的奎林。
He was also an alcoholic gambler. He has been showing fear of someone recently. It is also possible to assume that he is jealous because of competition and has any enemies or love rivals outside. In addition, someone may be motivated by money. For example, Kuelin who quit his job.
会不会偶然回来，或是和金兽有某种沟通？还有那打杂差的阿来，在昨天晚饭之前，忽然有人来报告他母亲有病，因此告假回去，似乎也不能不认为凑巧可疑。我们凭着这三种理由。
Will you come back by chance? Or is there some kind of collusion with Jin Shou? And the handyman a lie. Before dinner last night, someone suddenly came to report that his mother was sick, so he took leave to go back, so he seemed to have to think that the coincidence was suspicious. We rely on these three reasons.
就依照旧例，彼此分工办事。霍桑自己到把子路严家去探听。因为这一这最关紧要，并且严协英又是我们的委托人，所以霍桑不得不亲自去走一遭。姚国英担任往汉口路钱家去。
Just follow the old rules and divide the work between each other. Hawthorne went to the target Lu Yan's house to inquire. Because this move was the most critical, and Yan Jiaying was our client, Hawthorne had to go and see it in person. Yao Guiying took charge of going to Qian's house on Hankow Road.
调查有刚昨晚上吃喜酒时的情形，和有刚同席的是那几个人。我一个人往南市去找阿荣，查问他昨天晚上是否当真回家里去。内中要算汪巡官所担任的比较最省便，只在本区中调查。
Investigate what happened at Yogang's wedding reception last night, and who were the people at the table with Yu Gang. I went to Nanshur alone to find our Rong and asked him if he really went home last night. Among them, Inspector Wang's position is the most convenient, and he only investigates in this area.
近几天来张家附近有没有可疑的人？记忆妥定，我们4个人便都从张家出来。我一个人先自回狱。因为那天早晨我穿的衣服不少，这时候骄阳凌空，气候转热。
Are there any suspicious people near Zhang's house in recent days? After the plan was settled, the 4 of us came out of Zhang's house. I will go back to my apartment alone. Because that morning, I wore a lot of clothes. At this time, the sun was scorching in the sky and the weather was getting hotter.
我不能不回去换一身较轻便的衣服。我到了狱中，就上楼去更衣，一边推想这案子的情节。这种2重谋杀的案子，我们探案以来还是破题第一遭。这案子从情节上看
I had to go back and change into lighter clothes. When I got to the apartment, I went upstairs to change my clothes while thinking about the plot of the case. This is the first time we have solved this kind of double murder case since we started investigating the case. This case looks at the circumstances.
显然有2个凶手，一个下毒，一个行刺。霍桑曾假定那醉汉的死因是由于中毒，刀刺倒不是主因。那么下毒的人是谁？是屋外人还是屋内人？若是屋内人，可就是有刚的妻子严协英。
Apparently there were 2 murderers, one who poisoned and one who murdered. Hawthorne had assumed that the drunkard's death was due to poisoning, not the stabbing. So who was the poisoner? Is it an outsider or an inside person? If it was someone inside the house, could it be Yogang's wife Yan Jiaying?
赵木下的情势揣测，一的嫌疑负的最重，但一既谋杀了一的丈夫，怎么竟还敢登门请教我们？自己做了贼，帮同着胡搅捉贼，原是一种很普通而有效的谢罪方法。也许一来请教我们。
Judging from the current situation, E is the most heavily suspected. But since he murdered her husband, how come she dared to visit us and ask for advice? If you become a thief yourself and help your colleagues to catch the thief, this is a very common and effective way to absolve yourself of the crime. Maybe E Lai will ask us.
只是一的一种烟幕，目的在利用霍桑做一个避嫌疑的幌子。如果如此，霍桑又怎么样应付？他可会庇护一吗？不，霍桑是主持公道的人，公和私的界限分别的最严格。
It's just a smokescreen created by E to use Hawthorne as a cover to avoid suspicion. If so, how would Hawthorne cope? Will he protect E? No, Hawthorne is a man of justice, and the boundaries between public and private are the strictest.
我相信他绝不会毫无理由而徇一人的私意干违法的勾当。 但假使一的谋杀有刚，或者竟是有刚不义的反响，那么霍桑将怎样结束这件凶案？又怎样处置一呢？我换好了衣服。
I believe that he will never indulge in personal friendships and engage in illegal activities without any reason. But if E's murder was justified, or had the repercussions of injustice, how would Hawthorne end this murder? What to do with E? I've changed my clothes.
又在办事室中吸一支纸烟，休息片刻。等到纸烟烧尽了，正待拿了帽子往南市去，忽见霍桑气息羞羞地走进来。他一见我，很诧异地问道：“你还没有往王家码头去过？”我点点头。
I smoked a cigarette again in the office and rested for a while. When the cigarette was burned out, I was about to take my hat and go to Nancher when I saw Hawthorne walking in with his breath coming. When he saw me, he asked in surprise, "You haven't been to Wangjia Pier yet?" I nodded.
我正要动身去，既然如此，你姑且再坐一会，我同你一块儿去。你从哪里来？可有什么端倪？我放下帽子坐下来。霍桑取出一只白金龙，燃着了，坐在藤椅上，舒适地吸几口。他答道
I'm just about to leave. In that case, please sit down for a while. I'll go with you. Dot. Where are you from? Any clues? I put down my hat and sat down. Hawthorne took out a platinum dragon, lit it and sat on the wicker chair, taking a few puffs comfortably. Dot. He replied.
我在严家的邻居人家探访过一回，据说那严谐英回母家之后，时常和年轻的女伴们出去逛游戏场，这却是事实。那么匿名信中的话不像是虚构的了，是一部分总已实在。别的呢？
I visited the Yen family's neighbors for a while. It is said that after Yen Shuiying returned to her mother's house, she often went out to the game arcade with her young female companions. This is indeed true. Then the words in the anonymous letter don't look like fiction. Yes, part of it is always real. What about others?
我还见过严谐英和一的哥哥严小山，他怎么样说？他自然是竭力袒护他的妹妹，请求我把这件事弄明白。他说有刚是个登徒子，却曾有过纳妾的提议，因着他的反对，才不敢实行。
I also met Yen Shuiying and Yi's brother Yen Xiaoshan. What did he say? Of course he tried his best to protect his sister and asked me to figure this out. He said that Yu Gang was a deceitful disciple and had indeed proposed taking concubines, but he did not dare to implement it because of his opposition.
又据严谐英说，有刚又曾借着没有子嗣为由，路过离婚的意思，可是也为着畏惧一的哥哥，说不出充分的理由，到底不敢出口。照你想，严谐英有没有谋害丈夫的嫌疑？霍桑连续吸着烟。
According to Yen Jiaying, Yu Gang once expressed his intention to divorce on the grounds that he had no children, but because he was afraid of Yi's brother, he could not give a good reason and did not dare to speak out. In your opinion, is Yen Shuiying suspected of murdering her husband? Hawthorne smoked continuously.
还没有答复，忽而电话铃响，他忙起身去接。一会，他回进来，兴冲冲地向我报告，电话是汪希年巡官打来的。他虽很想努力，可惜总是吃力不讨好。这一次却已有些效果。什么效果？
There was still no reply, but suddenly the phone rang. He got up hurriedly to pick it up. A while. He came back and reported to me excitedly. The call was from Inspector Wang Xinian. Although he wanted to work hard, it was a pity that he always failed. This time, it has had some effect. What effect?
有什么新发现？他说他已把全区的警士们一个个都仔细问过。在昨夜里11点3刻的时候，有一班巡逻的警士们经过虬江路张家的洋房门前。
What's new? He said that he had carefully questioned every police officer in the district. At 11:30 last night, a patrol of police officers passed by the door of the Zhang family's bungalow on Qiujiang Road.
他们都看见一个穿黑衣的男子从张家的铁条大门里出来，这是多数警士都瞧见的，当然不会错误。这一个发现在案子上不能不算是很重要的。
They all saw a man in black coming out of the iron gate of Zhang's house. This is what most police officers have seen, and it is certainly not wrong. This discovery cannot but be considered very important in the case.
你想，这个人可就是我们理想中的那个刺客？也许是的。据金寿说，昨夜他和严谐英走出严家门口的时候，恰正打12点钟。从虬江路到把子路闽德里，坐黄包车至少得10多分钟。
Do you think this person is our ideal assassin? Maybe so. According to Jean Shou, it was 12 o'clock when he and Yen Shuiying walked out of Yan's house last night. It takes at least 10 minutes to take a rickshaw from Qiujiang Road to Mindli on Target Road.
他到了严家，又等他的主母从床上起来，梳洗好动身，也得再耽搁10多分钟。这样核正起来，可知金寿从张家出去，应得在11点半左右。当11点3刻10分。
When he arrived at Yan's house, he had to wait for more than 10 minutes for his mistress to get up from the bed, wash herself and set off. Combined with the evidence, it can be seen that Jean Shou left Zhang's house at around 11:30. When it's 11:15.
警士们所见的那个从张家出来的黑衣男子，分明不是金寿，却是另一个人。这一点我相信已没有疑义。不错，昨晚上张家里除了金寿，没有第二个男子。那人一定是行刺的凶手无疑。
The man in black clothes that the police officers saw coming out of Zhang's house was clearly not Jin Shou, but someone else. I believe there is no doubt about this. Good. Apart from Jin Shou, there was no other man in Zhang's family last night. That man must be the murderer.
但你想这个人在什么时候进张家去的？金寿说过，当晚饭的时候，他曾经到里面厨房里去搬晚饭。那时候大门上当然空虚没有人。在这个当，若是有人混了进去，匿伏在树荫后面。
But when do you think this person entered the Zhang family? Jin Shou said that during dinner, he once went to the kitchen to move the dinner. Of course there was no one at the gate at that time. At this moment, if someone sneaks in and hides behind the shade of the tree,
或是躲在后面的小园中等待机会动手，自然是人不知鬼不觉的。或者在金寿11点半出去报信的时候，屋子里反而静了，那人以为机会成熟，才悄悄地进屋子里去，也未可知。
Or they could hide in the small garden at the back, waiting for the opportunity to take action, naturally without anyone noticing. Or maybe when Jin Shou went out to report the news at 11:30, the house was quiet instead. It is unknown that the person thought the opportunity was ripe and then quietly entered the house.
我反辩道：“你第一个理由还尽情，第二个理由我不敢赞成，我看你还有些矛盾理。”他很疑讶似的说：“矛盾？你指什么说的？”我不明白。他张大了两眼向我望着。我说
I retorted, your first reason is too affectionate. I don't agree with your second reason. I think you are still somewhat conflicted. He said in surprise, contradiction? What do you mean? I don't understand. He looked at me with his eyes wide open. I said,
金寿出去报信是在有刚死之后，你怎么说凶手进屋子里去反在金寿出去以后？霍桑仍瞧着我，这就是你所谓矛盾点吗？其实你自己太粗心了，你得知道这是一件两重谋杀案啊。
Jin Shou went out to report the news after Yu Gang died. How do you say the murderer entered the house after Jin Shou left? Hawthorne still looked at me. Well, is this what you call a contradiction? In fact, you are too careless yourself. You have to know this is a double murder.
我呆了一呆，一时不能回答，就用纸烟掩护我的惶惑。霍桑继续说，虽然你也许有你的理解，现在姑且把你想象中对于那人的举动说说看。我对于这个人果然有一种假定的理解。
I was stunned for a moment, unable to answer, so I used a cigarette to cover up my confusion. Hawthorne continued, although, you may have your understanding. Now let's talk about your imagined behavior towards that person. I do have a presumptive understanding of this person.
霍桑既然叫我说，不妨就乘机和他商酌一下。我吐了一口烟，说，我也假定那人在晚饭时前进了大门，伏在树后。这一点和你的见解相同。直到10点钟后，有刚从外面回来，进了书房。
Since Hawthorne asked me to talk, I might as well take the opportunity to discuss it with him. I blew out a puff of smoke and said, I also assumed that the man sneaked into the door during dinner and hid behind the tree. This is the same as your opinion. It wasn't until 10 o'clock that someone came back from outside and entered the study.
那人先到窗口外面，点足向书室内探望，因此窗下的草地上就留着半个很深的足印。接着他就走进书房和有刚会面。那人是否为着寻仇而来，或是向有刚索什么东西，我不知道。
The man first went outside the window and stood on tiptoe to look into the study room, so there was a half-deep footprint on the grass under the window. Then he walked into the study and met Yu Gang. Whether that person came here seeking revenge or asking for something from Yu Gang, I don't know.
但瞧他们俩争吵的声音和痕迹，显见彼此起初曾用过武的。后来有刚不胜，就被那人刺死。那人又取了钥匙，偷开铁箱，窃取了银钱，然后再悄悄地出去。你以为对吗？霍桑蹙着双眉。
But looking at the sounds and traces of their quarrel, it was obvious that they had used force at first. Later, when Yu Gang couldn't win, he was stabbed to death by that man. The man took the key again, opened the iron box, stole the money, and then went out quietly. Do you think it is right? Hawthorne frowned.
两眼直瞧看地毯，摇头说：“不对，你我的设想唯一的不同点就在致命的缘由。你可是说有刚一定是阴毒致命，不是阴刀致命的？是，我相信如此。我敢说他们并没有用武。”
He looked straight at the carpet, shook his head and said, no. The only difference between your assumptions and mine is the cause of death. Are you saying that Yu Gang must have been killed by poison, not a knife? Yes. I believe so. I dare say they didn't use force.
但乔有刚身上的一只金表丝毫没有损伤，便是一个明证。我料他一定是阴毒致命。不过许医官还没有证明啊，他的证明只是一种法律上的手续。其实这一点我早已确定了。
But seeing that the gold watch on Yogang's body was not damaged at all is a clear proof. I thought he must have died from poison. But medical officer Su hasn't proved it yet. His certificate is just a legal formality. In fact, I have already determined this. Meet.
你是不是笑我夸口？我说给你听，有刚的伤痕你也瞧见的。 他的伤口平齐，四周又没有血渍，显见当刀刺的时候，他身上的血运已经停止，肌肉的皮肤也都已失去了弹性。
Are you laughing at my boast? I'll tell you. There are fresh scars, you can see them too. His wound was flat and there were no blood stains around it. It was obvious that when the knife was stabbed, the blood flow to his body had stopped and the muscles and skin had lost their elasticity.
所以伤口周缘一些没有卷缩的痕迹，这原是普通的生活反应，并且他的衬衫上也只有些血水，并不是鲜红的血液。这还不能算死后行刺的证明吗？凭这一层。
Therefore, there are no signs of curling around the wound. This is an ordinary reaction in life. And there was only some blood on his shirt, not bright red blood. Isn't this proof of posthumous assassination? Based on this layer.
就可见行刺的凶手进去一定是在金兽出外以后。你不能说我矛盾。况且金兽当时只知道有刚气诀，那时有刚身上是否已有刀痕，金兽却没有瞧。
It can be seen that the assassin must have entered after Jin Shou went out. You can't say I'm contradictory. Moreover, Jin Shou only knew about Yu Gang Chi Ju at that time. Jin Shou did not look at whether there were knife marks on Yu Gang's body at that time.
所以我料那人的行刺定是在金兽出外报信和有刚的母妹都在楼上的当，甚至假定那人混进大门就在这个时候，也未必一定不可能。那么争吵声又怎样解释？
So I guess that the man's assassination must have happened when Jin Shou went out to report the news and Yu Gang's mother and sister were upstairs. Even assuming that the man sneaked in at this time, it is not necessarily impossible. Then how to explain the quarrel?
难道那凶手先和有刚争执过一会，接着又退出来，等金兽出外后再行进去？不，这不近情理。要是真有人和有刚争吵，你记得他是往往会独个发酒疯的，这定是另一个人。总之
Could it be that the murderer argued with Yu Gang for a while, then withdrew, waiting for Jin Shou to go out before going in? No, this is unreasonable. If anyone really quarreled with Yu Gang, you remember he tended to get drunk and crazy alone. It must have been another person. In short,
我相信争吵和行刺绝不是在同一时候，也不是同一个人。这一番解释在情势上却有可能，我不由不暗暗点头。不过论情势，除了下毒行刺的以外，又多了一个争吵的人的可能。
I believe that the quarrel and the assassination were never at the same time, nor by the same person. This explanation is indeed possible based on the situation, and I couldn't help but secretly nod. However, based on the situation, in addition to the poisoning and assassination, there is also the possibility of another person quarreling.
更复杂了些。同时我也自认我的查看伤势不及他的精细。霍桑吸了几口烟，又说：“如此，我们可以下一个结论，那行刺的人是这案中的刺犯，并不是主犯，主犯却是那下毒的人。”我应道
It's a little more complicated. At the same time, I also thought that my inspection of injuries was not as precise as his. Hawthorne took a few puffs of cigarette and then said, "In this way, we can draw a conclusion that the person who committed the assassination was the secondary culprit in this case, not the main culprit. The main culprit was the person who poisoned." I responded.
假使如此，你想这行刺的人是个什么样人？霍桑平素地说：“这个还待侦查。譬如金兽所说的戴途经眼镜的那个近视眼家伙，那个穿西装的高个子，还有仆人阿荣奎林等。”
Well, if so, who do you think the assassin was? Hawthorne frowned and said, "This still needs to be investigated." For example, Jin Shou mentioned the short-sighted guy wearing convex crystal glasses, the tall man in a suit, and the servant Arong Kuelin, etc.
都得加以调查，至少我们得听听姚探长的调查结果，再打算进行。那么那个下毒的主犯是谁？你可以有些眉目。霍桑摇摇头，这个人究竟是谁，我也还没有把握。我觉得这课题很复杂。
All must be investigated. At least we have to listen to Inspector Yao's investigation results before proceeding. So who is the main culprit of the poisoning? Do you have an idea? Hawthorne shook his head. I'm not sure who this person is yet. I think this subject is very complex.
我提示说，有刚昨晚是吃过喜酒的，他会不会就在钱家里中的毒？这只是一方面的疑问，不能就此说定。还有别一方面，还有屋内方面也不能忽视。我诧异地问道：“哦。”
I prompted, Yu Gang had a wedding reception last night. Could he have been poisoned at Shen's house? This is just one aspect of the question and cannot be settled. Is there another aspect? Yes. There are also aspects inside the house that cannot be ignored. I asked in surprise, "Oh."
你以为是屋内人干的？有根据吗？霍桑揉吸了烟尾，说：“根据自然有，而且很现成。你大概也瞧见的。”什么？我委实有些模糊。霍桑简洁地答道：“那书桌上的一把茶壶，0000000。”
Do you think it was someone inside the house who did it? Is there any basis for this? Hawthorne rubbed out the end of his cigarette and said, "It is based on nature, and it is very ready. You probably saw it too." Well, what? I'm really a little confused. Hawthorne simply replied, the teapot on the desk Lingling. Lingling. Lingling, .
电话的铃声打断了霍桑的话。 我见霍桑正伸着足躺着，就起身带他去接。电话是许继仁医官打来的，他已把痰盂中呕吐的东西验过，死者确实饮过多量的汾酒，酒中又的确含着砒毒。
The ringing of the phone interrupted Hawthorne's words. I saw Hawthorne lying down with his legs stretched out, so I got up to pick him up for him. The call was from Medical Officer Su Jiren. He had tested the vomited contents in the spittoon and found that the deceased had indeed drank too much Finjo, and the wine did contain arsenic.
那茶壶中的红茶也已仔细验过，却丝毫没有毒剂。因着霍桑曾叮嘱他注意毒死还是杀死问题，所以他先把化验的结果通知霍桑。尸身的检验，检察官还迟迟没有到场，所以还没有动手。
The black tea in the teapot has been carefully tested, but there is no trace of poison at all. Because of Hawthorne. He had been told to pay attention to the question of poisoning or killing, so he first informed Hawthorne of the test results. The prosecutor has not yet arrived for the autopsy of the body, so he has not started yet.
我把这话传给霍桑听了。霍桑呼烧了另一支烟，皱着双眉，兀自低着头，一言不发。我不知道他想些什么。这通知对于他的中毒见解分明已有了一种确定的印证。他怎么反而失望？
I passed this to Hawthorne. Hawthorne suddenly lit another cigarette, frowned, lowered his head and said nothing. I don't know what he was thinking. This notice is a definite confirmation of his clear understanding of poisoning. Why was he disappointed?
我问道：“霍桑，你想什么？”我正在想汾酒的性最猛烈，所以毒性发作的这么样快。不错，现在我们听了许医官的话，对于中毒的理解的中算已经把范围收缩些，得到了一条较捷的途径。
I asked, Hawthorne, what are you thinking about? I was thinking that Finjo is the most violent, that's why the toxicity attacks so quickly. That's right. Now that we have listened to Dr. Su's words, our understanding of poisoning has finally narrowed down a bit, and we have found a quicker way.
是不是？霍桑忽拿下了烟，抬起头来。包朗，你的意思可是说酒和毒既然发生了关系，我们若要追究毒的来因，只需注意钱家的喜酒。是啊，你的意思怎么样？我觉得他的问句太突兀。
Yes or no? Huasang suddenly took out the cigarette and raised his head. Bao Lang, what you mean is, since there is a relationship between wine and poison, if we want to investigate the cause of the poison, we only need to pay attention to the wedding wine of the Qian family. Yes. What do you mean? I think his question was too abrupt.
似乎另有含义。霍桑不答，他的头忽又低沉，把纸烟重新送进嘴唇间去，回复了先前的皱眉深思状态。我又说，刚才你说起茶壶，现在已经证明茶里面没有毒，毒在酒中。
It seems to have another meaning. Hawthorne didn't answer. His head suddenly lowered, he put the cigarette between his lips again, and returned to his previous state of frowning and deep thought. I added, just now you mentioned the teapot. Now it has been proven that there is no poison in the tea, the poison is in the wine.
你还有什么疑问？霍桑缓缓抬起些头，略略点一点，但他的双眉依然深锁着。我又问道：无论如何，往钱家去探查的任务一定是很重要的。你想姚国英可担任得了？霍桑仍低垂了头。
Do you have any questions? Hawthorne slowly raised his head, a little bit, but his eyebrows were still deeply furrowed. I asked again, in any case, the mission to investigate Qian's house must be very important. Do you think Yao Guiying can take the responsibility? Hawthorne still lowered his head.
缓缓答道：我从前已经和他会过几次，觉得他还虚心，所以他此番和我共事，还不致闹什么岔子。可惜他的观察力还不十分精确，学识上也差些，这就是他的不足的地方。那么你想这件事？
Slowly replied, I have met with him several times before, and I think he is still modest. Therefore, he will not cause any trouble when he works with me this time. Unfortunately, his observation skills are not very accurate, and his knowledge is also poor. These are his shortcomings. So you want this?
他可能愉快胜任，我希望他能够成功。照目前的情势看，他所负的责任却很重要。哎，外边有什么人来了？我果然听得门前有问答声，接着便见施贵执着一张名次走进来。阿荣。
Could he be happy and competent? I hope he can succeed. Judging from the current situation, his responsibility is indeed very important. Oh, someone is coming from outside. Sure enough, I heard questions and answers in front of the door, and then I saw Gui walking and holding a famous thorn. 7. Wrong.
来客就是我们盼望中的姚国英，他的光临给予我揭破疑团的希望，我们当然是很欢迎的。姚国英走进了我们的办事室，彼此招呼了几句，就坐在我们对面的藤椅上。霍桑抢着说
The visitor is the Yao Guiying we are looking forward to. His presence gives me hope of unraveling the mystery, and we certainly welcome him. Yao Guiying walked into our office, greeted each other a few words, and sat on the wicker chair opposite us. Hawthorne rushed to say,
国英兄，你此刻可是从汉口路钱家来？我想张有刚昨晚上并没有往钱家去吃喜酒，是不是？姚国英的眼中现出惊异的神气。霍先生，你有什么根据，竟这么样想？霍桑呆一呆，怎么？
Brother Guiying, are you coming from Qian's house on Hankow Road? I don't think Zhang Yugang went to Qian's house for a wedding banquet last night. Yes or no? Yao Guiying's eyes showed a look of surprise. Mr. Hua, what basis do you have for thinking this way? Hawthorne was stunned for a moment. What?
我料错了。姚国英点点头。我问过那新郎钱伯雄，张友刚昨晚的确去过的。霍桑的双目转了几转，突然把身子坐直起来，好像这一着出乎他的意外，有些失望。他说：“去过的。”
Did I make a mistake? Yao Guiying nodded. I asked the groom Qian Buxiong and Zhang Yugang did go there last night. Hawthorne's eyes rolled a few times, and he suddenly sat up straight, as if this move was beyond his surprise and a little disappointed. He said, Been there?
那么我料他没有在钱家喝过喜酒，这可也料错。姚国英的眼睛张得更大了，这倒不错。他在钱家坐了不久就走，果真没有喝酒。霍先生，你怎么知道的？莫非你已经往钱家里去？
Then I guess he has never had a wedding banquet at Qian's house. Is this wrong? Yao Guiying's eyes opened even wider. That's not bad. He sat at Qian's house for a short time before leaving, and he really didn't drink. Mr. Hua, how did you know? Could it be that you have gone to Qian's house?
霍桑舒了一口气，摇摇手说：“不是，不是。张友刚不曾在钱家喝酒的想法，我在数分钟前才拟成。我不曾到钱家去过。”姚探长的眼眶收敛些，但仍不住地眨着。他向我瞧瞧。
Hawthorne breathed a sigh of relief, shook his hand and said, No, no. I just made up the idea a few minutes ago that Zhang Yugang would not drink at Qian's house. I have never been to Qian's house. Inspector Yao's eyes narrowed a little, but he still blinked. He looked at me.
我和他交换了一瞥，也无从清检他的疑团，因为霍桑的料想的根据是什么，我也莫名其妙。一会，姚国英说：“霍先生，你既然知道他不曾饮酒，那么你也许和我有一个相同的见解。”
I exchanged glances with him, but I could not alleviate his doubts, because I could not figure out what Hawthorne's suspicion was based on. After a while, Yao Guiying said, Mr. Hua, since you know that he has never drank alcohol, you may have the same opinion as me.
你有什么见解？友刚既没有喝酒，昨晚上的举动显见不是酒疯，并且经受所说，他觉得他主人讲话时酒气直冲的话，分明也并不实在。这样，这里面就很有研究的价值。霍先生，你可同意？
What's your opinion? Yugang didn't drink, so his behavior last night clearly wasn't drunk. Moreover, Jean Shou said that he felt that his master's words, which were drunk when he spoke, were clearly not true. In this way, there is great research value here. Mr. Hua, do you agree?
霍桑微微一笑，说：“国英兄，对不起，我不能同意。”失望的神气移到了国英的脸上。我知道友刚虽没有在钱家饮酒，但在别的地方却曾喝过酒。你大概还没有查明白。姚国英涨红了脸。
Hawthorne smiled slightly and said, Brother Guiying, I'm sorry, I can't agree. Huh. A look of disappointment moved to Guiying's face. I know that although Yugang didn't drink at Qian's house, he drank in other places. You probably haven't found out yet. Yao Guiying blushed.
凄凄地说：“是我只知道他在6点钟时到过钱家，后来他忽然接了一个电话，就辞了主人出去。他从钱家出去以后有没有喝过酒，我的确还没有弄明白。霍先生，你怎么知道的？”
Chi said, Yes, I only know that he went to Qian's house at 6 o'clock. Then he suddenly received a phone call and left the host. Did he drink after leaving Qian's house? Wine, I really haven't figured it out yet. Mr. Hua, how do you know?
霍桑淡淡地说：“友刚饮酒不饮酒的问题，我们刚才嗅了痰盂中的气味，早已知道。但他饮酒的地方不在钱家，却在别处。我刚才接到了许继仁的电话，方才确定。据许医官的查验。”
Hua Sang said lightly, There is a question of whether to drink or not. We just smelled the smell in the spittoon and already knew it. But the place where he drank was not at Qian's house, but somewhere else. I just received a call from Su Jiren, so I was sure that according to medical officer's examination.
友刚曾饮过多量的汾酒，汾酒是白酒，是高粱酒一类中的最强烈的白酒。你总也知道上海的风俗，丧事才用白酒，婚庆喜节总是用绍兴酒的。友刚所饮的既然是白酒。
You just drank too much Fenjiu. Fenjiu is a baijiu, the strongest form of sorghum liquor. You always know the customs in Shanghai. Liquor is only used for funerals, and Shaoxing wine is always used for weddings and festivals. Since what you just drank was white wine.
可见他一定不是在钱家喝醉的。霍桑的解释一箭双雕地打破了姚国英和我的疑团，我才知他方才突兀的问句也不是凭空而发的。霍桑问姚国英道：“这样说，友刚昨天先到钱家。”
It can be seen that he must not have been drunk at Qian's house. Hawthorne's explanation killed 2 birds with 1 stone. Yao Guiying and I had doubts. Only then did I realize that his sudden question was not out of thin air. Hawthorne asked Yao Guiying, in this way, does it matter? I just arrived at Qian's house yesterday.
后来又从钱家里被那电话叫出去，是不是？正是。那打电话叫友刚的人是谁？我也问过钱伯雄的，但友刚当时并没有说明， 只说有紧要的约会不得不去。所以有刚出了钱家以后
Later, he was called out of Qian's home by that phone call. Yes or no? Exactly. Who was the person who called Yu Gang? I also asked Qian Buxiong, but Yu Gang did not explain at the time. He only said that he had an important appointment and had to go. So after I just left the Qian family.
和什么人约会，约会的地方在哪里，和所谈论的是什么事，我都还没有查明。那么那电话的约会是否在有刚预料之中，或是偶然发生的？你可曾问过钱伯雄？像是偶然发生的。
I haven't found out who I was dating, where the date was, or what we were talking about. So was that phone date expected, or did it happen by chance? Have you ever asked Chamber Bear? Like it happened by accident.
因为有刚临别时曾向主人道歉，他说他本是特地去吃喜酒的，却不料有着意外的约会，这可见那约会不在他的预料之中。霍桑闭着眼睛想了一想，说：“伦情。”
Because I had just apologized to my host when I was leaving. He said that he had gone specially to have a wedding banquet, but unexpectedly he had this unexpected date. This shows that the date was not what he expected. Hawthorne closed his eyes and thought for a while, then said, on the basis of feelings.
这约会的人和这一件凶案当然有关系。现在我们虽不知道那人是谁，但要寻究那人的足迹，似乎也不能算是12分难事。姚国英欢喜地说：“这就好。霍先生，你可是已有什么入手方法？”
Of course this date has something to do with this murder. Although we don't know who that person is now, it doesn't seem to be very difficult to trace his footprints. Yao Guiying said happily, that's good. Mr. Hua, do you have any methods to get started?
我料想那人不但和有刚相识，并且也是钱伯雄的朋友。但瞧他知道钱家的电话号数，又知道昨天是伯雄的婚期，预料张有刚一定去吃喜酒，所以打电话到钱家去找他，就很明显。
I guessed that that person was not only acquainted with Yu Gang, but also a friend of Qian Buxiong. But it was obvious that he knew the phone number of the Qian family and knew that yesterday was Buxiong's wedding. He expected that Zhang Yu Gang would go to the wedding banquet, so he called the Qian family to look for him.
我又料想他们约会的地方一定是在专供小酌的酒铺子里，他们所饮的都是汾酒。汾酒是专卖酒的酒铺中才有，又是善于饮酒的人饮的，显见那约有刚的人也是一个老酒客。
I also guessed that the place where they dated must be in a wine shop that specializes in drinking. All they drank was Fenjiu. Fenjiu is only available in wine shops that specialize in wine, and it is drunk by people who are good at drinking. It is obvious that the man Yu Gang is also an old drinker.
凭着这2点线索去探听，也许可以容易些。至于所谈的事情，我虽不能凭空猜测，但大概总是不可告人的秘密事。既然如此，我只要到这种酒铺子里去探听好了。不错。
It might be easier to find out based on these 2 clues. As for the things discussed, although I can't guess out of thin air, it is probably always a secret that cannot be told. In that case, I just need to go to this wine shop to inquire about it. Good.
现在较大的酒铺里大概都装着电话，你不妨先往那些酒铺里去问问，也许可以得到些端倪。此外，你可曾得到什么别的消息？我又曾到新面粉公司里去问过。
Nowadays, the larger liquor stores probably have telephones installed. You might as well go to those wine shops and ask, maybe you can get some clues. Did you get any other news? I went to Xinxin Flour Company again and asked.
证明了那匿名信是有刚的手笔。我又知道有刚名义上虽然在公司里服务，其实他并没有规定的时间在公司里办事，因为公司经理沈某原是有刚四父的老朋友，平日有些放任有刚。
It proved that the anonymous letter was written by Yu Gang. I also know that although Yu Gang works in the company in name, he actually does not have a specified time to work in the company. Because the company manager Shen is an old friend of the father who has a stepfather, and he is usually a bit laissez-faire and stubborn.
所以有刚可以自由地在外面挥霍胡闹，我看他的交友一定很广。你可曾调查他的朋友之中有没有和他怀怨作对的？姚国英应道，我问过的有好几个。据他的一个姓杨的同事说。
So Yu Gang is free to spend his time outside. I think he must have a wide range of contacts. Have you ever investigated whether any of his friends have any grudge against him? Yao Guiying responded, I have asked several of them, according to one of his colleagues named Yang.
有刚的脾气太坏，不时会跟人家翻脸。公司里的一个管仓员，叫傅敬三，曾为着傍女龄的事和有刚打过架。又有一个有刚的老同学姓于的，也曾为了赌钱的事到公司中去大吵。
Yu Gang has a bad temper and would fall out with others from time to time. A warehouseman in the company, well, his name was Fu Jingsan, had a fight with Yu Gang over the issue of the popular actress, and an old classmate of Yu Gang named Yu also came to the company over gambling. Make a big noise in the company.
不过内中有个姓姜名叫智莲的，好似和有刚有什么更深的仇恨。霍桑似乎被这句话打动了神。哦，你可知道是怎么一回事？我也打听过，可是问不出详情。
However, there was a man named Jiang Zhilian who seemed to have a deeper hatred for Yu Gang. Hawthorne seemed to be moved by these words. Oh, do you know what's going on? I also asked about it, but I couldn't get the details.
我只知道他们起先是一度邻居，彼此很交好。 江之莲还在什么大学里读书，时常在有刚家里出入，往来很密切。后来不知为着什么，有刚在背后常说江之莲的坏话。不但如此
All I know is that they were neighbors at first and were very friendly with each other. Jiang Jilian was still studying in some university. He often went in and out of Yougang's house and had close contact with him. Later, for some unknown reason, Yogang often spoke ill of Jiang Jilian behind his back. Not only that,
有刚还流露一种畏惧智莲的态度，仿佛怕他寻仇似的。但内幕中的真相怎样，不但那姓杨的不明白，别的人也没有一个知道。这个江智莲现在在哪里？姚国英瞪过道：“我不知道。”
Yogang also showed an attitude of fear of Jilian, as if he was afraid that he would seek revenge. But what is the truth behind the scenes? Not only the man named Yang doesn't understand, but no one else knows either. Where is this Jiang Jilian now? Yao Guiying glared at Guiying and said, I don't know.
据说江之莲已在1个月前失踪了。扫兴！不但霍桑又重新皱眉低头，我也空欢喜了一场。真相在黑夜迷途的时候，忽然远远地看见一丝灯光闪了一闪，心中自然快乐。
It is said that Jiang Jilian disappeared a month ago. Disappointing. Not only did Hawthorne frown and lower his head again, but I was also overjoyed. It was just like when I was lost in the dark night and suddenly saw a flash of light in the distance. I felt naturally happy in my heart.
可是正待追奔前去，走上正途，一刹那间，那灯光消失不见，重新陷于黑暗之中。这时我忽然记起了金寿所说的那2个问信的人。我问道：“姚探长，那江智莲的状貌怎么样？”姚国英道
But just as he was about to run forward and take the right path, the light disappeared in an instant and he was plunged into darkness again. At this time, I suddenly remembered the 2 people who asked for letters that Jin Shou said. I asked, Inspector Yao, how is Jiang Jilian's appearance? Yao Guiying said.
据说是一个常穿西装的人，约莫有26、7岁，是个高个子。不，我也问过，个子瘦小，比我还短些。可是戴凸镜眼镜的近视眼，也不是。姓杨的说，他不戴眼镜，是个漂亮的少年。
It is said that he is a man who often wears suits and is about 26 or 17 years old. Is he a tall man? No. I also asked, are you tall and thin, shorter than me? But myopia wearing convex crystal glasses? No. The person surnamed Yang said that he does not wear glasses and is a handsome young man.
2个炮仗都泄气，我感到些烦闷。霍桑忽仰起头来：“包朗，你怎么这样健忘？金寿所说的那个戴凸镜眼镜的男子，他从前没有见过；那个穿西装的高个子，也只见过1次。”
Both firecrackers were discouraged. I feel a little bored. Hawthorne suddenly raised his head. Bao Lang, why are you so forgetful? He has never seen the man wearing convex crystal glasses that Jin Shou mentioned. He has only seen the tall man in a suit once.
但据国英兄所知，那江智莲却是时常在张家出入的，这分明是另一个人，并不是金寿所说的那2个人了。指摘并不是无的放矢，我只有自认粗心。姚国英利用我沉默的机会。
But as far as Brother Guiying knows, Jiang Jilian often comes in and out of the Zhang family. This is obviously another person, not the 2 people Jin Shou mentioned. The accusation is not without purpose. I only admit that I was careless. Yao Guiying took advantage of my silence.
也向霍桑询问在严家方面调查的结果，霍桑便把探得的情形和汪巡官许一世等的报告仔细向姚国英说了一遍。
Also asked Hawthorne about the results of the investigation into the Yen family. Hua Sang carefully told Yao Guiying the situation he had discovered and the reports from Inspector Wang, Dr. Su, and others.
姚国英也认为巡逻警士们在半夜时发现的那一个从张家出来的人很关紧要，但他以为除了失踪的江智莲、戴眼镜问信的陌生客和昨天下午去访问有刚的西装长子以外，
Yao Guiying also believed that the person coming out of Zhang's house discovered by the patrol policeman in the middle of the night was very important. But he thought that except for the missing Jiang Jilian, the stranger wearing glasses asking for a letter, and the eldest son in a suit who visited Yugang yesterday afternoon.
那仆人阿荣和已经离歇的包车夫奎林也都在可疑之列。霍桑也很以为然，议定先从打听阿荣的行动着手。姚国英答应再去探访昨晚和张有刚饮酒的人。商议既妥，姚国英就作别出去。
The servant Arong and the coachman Kuelin who had already left were also suspected. Hawthorne also agreed, and decided to start by asking about Arong's actions. Yao Guiying promised to visit the people who drank with Zhang Yugang last night. After the discussion was settled, Yao Guiying said goodbye and went out.
我也就继续我原有的任务，和霍桑一块动身往南市王家码头去访问阿荣。据金寿说，昨天阿荣回家去在傍晚时分，那时候有刚已经在银行里提取了款项回家。
I continued my original mission and set off with Hawthorne to Wangjia Wharf in Nanshire to visit Arong. According to Jin Shou, Arong went home in the evening yesterday. At that time, Yugang had already withdrawn money from the bank and returned home.
因为霍桑曾经打电话向沪江银行问过，知道有刚提款的时刻恰在午后4点钟前所提取的是1500元钞票，因此阿荣的忽然告假回去，事实上未免有些嫌疑。 到达了王家码头。
Because Huasang had called Hujiang Bank and learned that a withdrawal had just been made just before 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the withdrawal was 1,500 yuan in banknotes, so Arong's sudden leave to go back was actually unavoidable. Somewhat suspicious. Arrive at Wangjie Pier.
我和霍桑依着金寿所说的住址找寻，果然在一条小巷里面寻得了阿荣的住宅。阿荣是崇明人，有一个母亲和他的哥哥嫂嫂等住在一起。他们住的房屋是一所很卑陋的平屋。
Huasang and I searched according to the address mentioned by Jin Shou, and sure enough we found Arong's house in an alley. Arong is from Chongming. He has a mother and lives with his brother and sister-in-law. The house they live in is a very humble bungalow.
已十分破旧。那时，那一扇被风雨吹打得半烂半黑的小门静悄悄地关着。霍桑在门口打量了一会，不及进去。他瞧见斜对门有一个老婆子正伏在街石边洗衣，便走上前去搭讪。霍桑道
Very dilapidated. At that time, the small door, half rotten and half blackened by the wind and rain, was quietly closed. Hawthorne looked at the door for a while, then went in. He saw an old woman leaning against the steps and doing laundry across the door, so he walked up and struck up a conversation. Hawthorne said,
老婆婆，忙啊。你洗的衣多么白啊。对不起，我要问一问话。这斜对门的是不是阿荣的家？那老妇人抬头一瞧，看见我们都穿着整洁的西装，就也含笑答话。真的。
Old lady, are you busy? Well, your laundry is so white. I'm sorry, I have to ask a question. Is this diagonally across the door from Arong's home? The old woman looked up and saw that we were all wearing neat suits, so she answered with a smile. Really?
在都市里，衣服是具有微妙作用的。一道，先生是不是问阿喜家？哎，是的。哎，不错。阿喜还有一个弟弟阿荣呢。正是。他们的母亲可在家里。一怎么能出去？前几天王嫂子病得很重。
Clothes play a subtle role in the city. E said, Sir, are you asking about Axi's family? Oh, yes. Oh, that's right. Axi also has a younger brother, Arong. Exactly. Is their mother at home? Well, how can he go out? Sister-in-law Wang was very ill a few days ago.
今天才好一些。昨晚上一的小儿子也特地回来过，他就叫阿荣。昨晚上你看见过阿荣？老妇似已引起了闲谈的兴趣，立直了身子，把自己身上的补缀的青布团身抹抹干手。一说
It's just better today. Shang Yi's youngest son also came back specially last night. His name is Arong. Have you seen Arong last night? The old woman seemed to be interested in chatting. She stood up straight and wiped her hands dry on the patchwork green cloth she was wearing. E said,
怎么不见？我还瞧见他回去。那时候已很晚了。霍桑的目光微微一闪，接着忙旋过头去，向巷口瞧了一瞧，似乎借此掩蔽他的眼光，不使他的惊异的神色给老妇瞧见。
Why not? I also saw him go back. It was very late by then. Hawthorne's eyes flashed slightly, and then he quickly turned his head and glanced at the entrance of the alley, as if to hide his eyes and prevent his surprised expression from being seen by the old woman.
我也觉得这一问果然问出了破绽。昨晚上阿荣竟没有住在他自己的家里，但是他也明明没有回到主人家里去啊。他往哪里去的呢？霍桑继续问道。哎，老婆婆，阿荣回去时你瞧见的。
I also feel that this question really contains a flaw. Arong didn't live in his own home last night. But he clearly didn't return to his master's house. Where did he go? Huasang continued to ask, Hey, old lady, what did you see when Arong went back?
那时约在什么时候？你可还记得？老妇道，昨晚我知道王嫂子病得很厉害，家里人手又不多，所以我过去陪过半夜。先生，金乡邻银亲戚，我们穷人有了事，只有靠邻居帮忙啊。
When was that time? Do you still remember? The old woman said, Last night I knew that sister-in-law Wang was very ill and there were not many people at home, so I went over to stay with her in the middle of the night. Sir, golden neighbors, silver relatives. When we poor people have something to do, we can only rely on our neighbors for help. Well.
你真是热心肠。你可知道阿荣怎么会回来的？哎，先生，你总晓得阿喜是在码头上吃饭的，一天不做，一天不活。可是人倒是很孝顺规矩的。他看见妈的寒热不退，有些慌。
You are so warm-hearted. Do you know how Arong came back? Oh, sir, you always know that she eats on the pier. If he doesn't do anything for a day, he won't live for a day. But people are very filial and well-behaved. He was a little panicked when he saw that his mother's cold and fever persisted.
所以昨天他托一个朋友，顺便带个口信给他的弟弟阿荣。晚饭时候，阿荣果然回来了，我也看见他。他还跟我聊过一会天。阿荣也跟他哥哥一样，是个规矩人。他说他主人家里正缺少仆人。
So yesterday he asked a friend to send a message to his brother Arong. Arong did come back during dinner, and I saw him too. He also chatted with me for a while. Arong, like his brother, is a well-behaved person. He said that his master's house was short of servants.
不能不连夜回去。所以到了，大约2更过后吧，他就重新回去。那时候我还没有走呢。霍桑听了这一席话，不再问下去，谢了一声，回身来叩阿荣家的门。一会
I had to go back overnight. So it's about after the second update, right? He went back again. I hadn't left yet at that time. After hearing this, Hawthorne stopped asking any more questions, thanked him, and turned around to knock on the door of Arong's house. After a while,
里边有一个穿有光破衣的蓬头的中年妇人走出来招呼。霍桑晚声道：“我们从虹口来，顺便带一个口信给你们。”他说了这句，脸呆瞪瞪地向那妇人瞧着。
Inside, a middle-aged woman with disheveled hair and greasy rags came out to say hello. Hawthorne said politely, "We are coming from Hongkou, and we have a message for you." After saying this, he stared at the woman blankly.
似乎要查看衣的颜色有没有精液。那妇人忙陪着笑脸应道：“先生们可是给叔叔带信来，可要里面来坐坐。”霍桑仍注视着衣的脸，答道：“不，谢谢，我们不进来了。阿荣叫我们问一声。”
It seems that he wants to check if there is any surprise in Yi's color. The woman hurriedly put on a smile and replied, "Gentlemen, are you bringing a letter to your uncle? Do you want to sit inside?" Hawthorne still looked at Yi's face and replied, "No, thank you, we are not coming in. Rong asked us to ask."
你婆婆今天可好一些？妇人道：“多谢先生，婆婆的发烧今天好多了。替我回一个信，请叔叔放心吧。”霍桑点点头，乘势向里面一望。我看见一间黑漆漆的小室，中间用炉锡隔着。
Is your mother-in-law feeling better today? The woman said, "Thank you, sir. My mother-in-law's fever is much better today. Please reply to a letter for me, uncle. Please don't worry." Hawthorne nodded and took advantage of the situation to look inside. I saw a dark small room separated by a reed mat.
有几张破旧的椅桌和家用的桶盆之类纵横地罗列着。这景状足以显示阿荣家的境况实在非常穷困。我们回身出小巷的时候，霍桑忽附着我的耳朵说：“包朗，这一趟真有意思。”
There were several old chairs, tables, household buckets, and basins arranged vertically and horizontally. This scene is enough to show that the situation of Arong's family is really very poor. When we turned back out of the alley, Hawthorne suddenly whispered in my ear, "Bao Lang, this trip is really interesting."
我们的案子又进一步了。爸，兄道，在中饭时分，电车上的乘客最是拥挤不堪。我上了电车，本想和霍桑谈论阿荣的问题，可是人多耳杂，谈起来究竟不便。阿荣昨晚的不归，在霍桑看来。
Our case has gone one step further. 8. The murderous knife. The passengers on the tram were most crowded during lunchtime. I got on the tram and wanted to talk to Hawthorne about Arong's problem, but there were so many people and it was inconvenient to talk. Arong's failure to return last night seemed to Hawthorne.
仿佛已确定他和凶案有关，我的意思却略有些不同。因为阿荣的回家确实是因着他母亲的患病，可见我们当初所假定的他也许见财起意而托故回家的理由已不成立了。
It seems that he is related to the murder. What I mean is slightly different. Because Arong's return home was indeed due to his mother's illness. It can be seen that the reason we originally assumed that he might be motivated by wealth and return home with some excuse is no longer valid.
不过他又明明是当夜就回主人家的，何以至今不见他的踪迹？他遇到了什么意外事吗？或是他果真有过行刺主人的举动，因而避匿不敢露面吗？从各方面看。
But he obviously returned to his master's house that night. Why is there no trace of him so far? Did something unexpected happen to him? Or did he really have an assassination attempt on his master, so he avoided showing up? Look at it from all aspects.
有刚的性情本是刚愎而暴躁的，当然容易和人家结怨。阿荣和他的主人，难道也有什么不解的怨嫌，竟至行刺报复？如果如此，他这时既已藏匿无踪，势必也不容易找寻。
Yogang's temperament is stubborn and irritable, and of course it is easy to make enemies with others. Could it be that Arong and his master had some unresolved grudges and went so far as to commit murder in revenge? If so, since he has disappeared without a trace at this time, it will definitely not be easy to find him.
那么霍桑所说的案子上的进步又是指什么说的呀？我们回到狱中的时候，施贵慌忙报告，他道：“刚才姚探长有电话来说，他已经查明那个喝酒的人姓贾，是张东明酒店的老主顾。”
So what does Hawthorne mean by the progress in the case? When we returned to the apartment, Shirgui hurriedly reported. He said, "Inspector Yao called just now, saying that he had found out that the drinker's surname was Jia, and he was a regular customer of Zhang Dongming Hotel."
天天晚上在那儿的，姚探长今晚上就要去看他。霍桑点点头，就吩咐预备吃饭。我们忙了半天，此刻才得坐定。但我因这案子还没有头绪，心思不定，胸膛间好像住了个疤。
There every night. Inspector Yao is going to see him tonight. Hawthorne nodded and ordered to prepare for dinner. We had been busy for a long time, and now we had to sit down. But because I still had no clue about the case, I was unsettled, and there seemed to be a dam built in my chest.
饭物自吃不下去， 霍桑仍镇静如常，可是他只管吃喝，并没有半句话提及暗示。饭罢后，我忍耐不住，就趁着吸烟休息的当向霍桑讨论。我说：“你方才说这案子又进了一步。”
I can't eat anymore. Hawthorne remained calm as usual, but he only ate and drank and did not say a word about the case. After dinner, I couldn't bear it anymore, so I took advantage of my smoking break to discuss it with Hawthorne. I said, "You just said that this case has taken another step forward."
可是指阿荣的踪迹不明说的。霍桑点头道：“正是。我认为阿荣的一夜不归是全案中唯一的线索。何以见得？他昨天一听到他母亲的病号，便赶紧告假回去，可见他倒是一个孝顺的儿子。”
But you mean Arong's whereabouts are unknown? Hawthorne nodded and said, "Exactly. I think Arong's one-night absence is the only clue in the whole case. How can we see it? As soon as he heard about his mother's illness yesterday, he quickly took leave and went back. This shows that he is a filial son.
因此就可以推想他平素的操行。他到了家中，又因着主人家的职务，竟至连夜赶回，不敢留顿，又可以见得他是一个安分守己的人。瞧这两点，我们就可推知他昨夜不归。
Therefore, we can infer his usual conduct. When he arrived at home, because of his master's duties, he rushed back all night and did not dare to stay. It can be seen that he is a law-abiding person. Looking at these 2 points, we can infer that he did not return last night.
当然不会有什么素昌胡闹的举动，那是什么呢？自然是和暗示有关系了。这样说，他倒是一个好人，但怎么又会干这样的勾当？这也难定。他家里很穷，母亲又病在床上，钱当然是很需要的。
Of course there won't be any misbehavior of prostitutes. What is that? Of course it has something to do with the case. In this way, he is a good person, but why would he do such a thing? This is difficult to determine. His family was very poor and his mother was ill in bed, so money was certainly needed.
一个没受教育或者意志薄弱的人遭到了引诱力强烈的环境，后果是说不定的。阿荣也许因此受了诱引，见利忘害，那也不能说一定不可能。虽然他即使需要钱，但行凶杀人。
If an uneducated or weak-willed person encounters a highly tempting environment, the consequences are uncertain. Arong may have been tempted by this and saw the benefits and forgot the harm, but that cannot be said to be impossible. Although, even if he needs money, he commits murder.
竟把他的性命做代价，似乎也不至出此于策。霍桑把烟灰弹去了些，瞧着我笑道：“包朗，你怎么还口口声声说定他行凶？我早已说过，有钢的致命在毒，不在刀。难道你还不相信？”
Even if he paid the price with his life, it seemed that he would not make such a foolish move. Hawthorne flicked some ashes from his cigarette, looked at me and said with a smile, "Bao Lang, why do you keep saying that he committed the murder? I have already said that Yogang's fatality lies in the poison rather than the knife. Don't you still believe it?"
况且我只说阿荣是全案中的线索，不曾说他是行刺的凶手。你莫非没有听清楚？我也笑道：“好，好，我误会了。现在你打算怎样进行？”现在我打算休息一会，静待时机的演化。什么？
Besides, I only said that Arong was a clue in the whole case, and I never said that he was the murderer. Didn't you hear clearly? I also smiled and said, "Okay, okay. I misunderstood. Now how do you plan to proceed?" Now I plan to take a rest and wait for the opportunity to evolve. What?
这样的一案，你还不打算积极进行？霍桑缓缓喷了一口烟，安闲地说：“包朗，你别性急。我希望这案子的急速了结，不下于你的急切的期望。可是你也应当知道我们的侦探工作。”
Aren't you planning to proceed with such a mysterious case urgently? Hawthorne took a puff of smoke slowly and said calmly, "Bao Lang, don't be impatient. I hope this case will be settled as quickly as you hope. But you should also know about our detective work.
有缓急的分别，宜于急的固然1秒钟都不能迟缓，宜于缓的却也不能着急，急了反而会坏事。这一件案子我已经胸有成竹，照此刻的情形看，就是宜缓而不宜急的。他这一番议论
There is a distinction between urgency and urgency. It's better to be hasty, of course, you can't slow down for a second. It's better to be slow, but you can't be anxious, because being anxious will cause bad things. I am already confident about this case. Judging from the current situation, it is appropriate to proceed slowly rather than hastily. His discussion.
好似含着些说教的意味，我未免有些不耐，但末了一句胸有成竹的话却含有浓厚的吸引力。我问道：“你以为这案子只缓不宜急吗？有什么理由？”霍桑想了一想，便道：“也好。”
It seemed to have some preaching meaning, which made me a little impatient, but the last sentence of "well-informed" was very attractive. I asked, "Do you think this case should be slowed down rather than urgently? What's the reason?" Hawthorne thought for a moment and then said, "That's fine."
我敢说，这一件案子中的凶犯都是和死者相识的人，不比得到图劫杀，稍一迟缓，凶手就不免要远一漏网。并据这案子发掘既迟，案情又这样复杂幻密，凶手反可以安逸放心。
I dare say that the murderers in this case were all acquaintances of the deceased. It would be easier for the murderer to slip through the net if there was a slight delay. Since this case was discovered late and the circumstances of the case are so complicated and mysterious, the murderer can rest easy.
没有积极逃脱的必要，这样我们也不妨按部进行，用不着手忙脚乱。还有一层理由，此刻我们既然探得了2个疑点，在没有完全解释之前，当然也不能够越级进行。那2个疑点，第一
，There is no need to rush away. In this way, we might as well proceed step by step without having to rush around. There is another reason. Now that we have discovered 2 doubtful points, of course we cannot proceed beyond the level before fully explaining them. Those 2 doubts. First.
姚国英既然访得了那个和张有刚同饮的贾某，这个人一定有关系，必须先问个明白。第二，那阿荣也得设法把他寻到，然后才可以明白案中的真相。
Since Yao Guiying was able to interview Jia, who drank with Zhang Yugang, this person must be related, and he must first find out. Secondly, our Rong must also try to find him, and only then can we understand the truth in the case.
这2件事都是只能静待发展而不能急进的，你说是不是？要见那姓贾的人，果然不能不等到晚上，但要找寻阿荣，怎见得也不能急速进行。阿荣的踪迹，我虽然急于要知道，但急也没用。
Both of these things can only wait for development and cannot be rushed forward. Do you think so? If you want to see the person named Jia, you have to wait until night, but if you want to find our Rong, why can't you do it quickly? Although I am eager to know the traces of a wrong, there is no point in being anxious.
只能等他自己露面。若是防他逃走，那么昨晚上他仅多机会，此刻即使要追寻也来不及了。你只坐着等他，他会自己露面。是，我相信如此。不过我也准备埋伏依着棋子。
We can only wait for him to show up. If we were to prevent him from escaping, he would have had many opportunities last night, but now even if he wanted to pursue him, it would be too late. You just sit and wait for him? Will he show up on his own? Yes. I believe so. But I am also prepared to ambush a chess piece.
我得打一个电话给江西年巡官，请他派一个人到阿荣的家里去，多一只眼睛。哎，外面可是汪巡官吗？真巧极了！我果然听得前门响，回头一望，汪巡官已经匆匆地推门踱进来。
I have to make a call to Inspector Jiang Xinian and ask him to send someone to our Rong's house to get an extra, alas. Is that Inspector Wang outside? Hey, what a coincidence. Sure enough, I heard the front door ringing. When I looked back, Inspector Wang had already hurriedly opened the door and walked in.
他的肥胖的头颅昂得很高，仿佛他的颈项间新装饰了一条钢骨，他的粗壮的腰肢也挺得笔直，态度上有一种撩人眼目的吸引力。霍桑招呼道：“汪先生，我正要和你谈话，你来了，再好，那。”
His fat head was held high, as if a new steel bone had been installed around his neck. His thick waist was also straight, and his attitude had a sultry appeal. Hawthorne greeted, Mr. Wang, I'm just about to talk to you. You're here, no matter how good it is then.
没有2个字还没有吐出来，他突然住口。他的眼珠急转几转，面色忽然变异。他呆瞪瞪地瞧在汪希年的脸上，显一种诧异的神情。汪巡官，你可是又有什么新的发现？
Before he could utter the word no, he suddenly stopped. His eyes turned rapidly, and his expression suddenly changed. He stared blankly at Wang Xinian's face, showing a surprised look. Wang Inspector, have you discovered anything new?
汪巡官连连点了几点头，一边摸摸短须，伸手在衣袋里摸出一个长形的小纸包来，一边喘吁吁地答话：“是啊，霍先生，你瞧，这东西能不能算一种重要的发现？”霍桑急忙将纸包接过。
Inspector Wang nodded several times, touched his short beard, reached into his pocket and took out a long small paper bag, and answered breathlessly. Yes. Mr. Hua, look, can this be considered an important discovery? Hawthorne hurriedly took the paper package.
打开来一瞧，是一把雪亮的乌木柄小刀。那刀连柄约有4-5寸长，锋利而尖锐，两面又磨得很亮，丝毫没有锈迹。霍桑瞧了一瞧，急急站起来，取出一面放大镜。他把刀仔细查验。
Open it and take a look. It's a knife with a sharp ebony handle. The knife was about 4 or 5 inches long with its handle, sharp and pointed, and polished on both sides without any rust. Hawthorne took a look, stood up quickly and took out a magnifying glass. He examined the knife carefully.
又放在鼻孔上换了一嗅，他的眼睛里射出兴奋的光彩。他说：“哎，这果然是一把凶刀，可惜指纹给混乱了。汪巡官，你从哪里发现的？”汪巡官道：“那湿湿的东西。”
He put it to his nostrils and sniffed. His eyes sparkled with excitement. He said, "Oh, this is indeed a murderous knife. It's a pity that the fingerprints are confused. Inspector Wang, where did you find it?" Inspector Wang said, "The things in the corpse room."
不是有一个靠小巷的窗口吗？离窗口的北面不到3尺，有一只积垃圾的木桶。这把刀就是在小巷中的垃圾桶旁拾起来的。什么时候拾得的？约在1个钟头以前。
Isn't there a window facing an alley? Less than 3 feet to the north of the window, there is a wooden barrel collecting garbage. This knife was picked up next to the trash can in the alley. When did you find it? About an hour ago.
那时我因着检验官将要到场检验，预先带了几个警士去照料，顺便在小巷中查看一会，就发现这一把刀。你在垃圾旁边发现的？是，在垃圾桶的那一边，在南面，靠近窗口下面。
At that time, because the prosecutor was about to come to the scene for inspection, I took a few police officers to take care of it in advance. I checked in the alley for a while and found this knife. You found it next to the garbage? Yes. On that side of the trash can? On the south side, near the window.
霍桑摸着下颏寻思了一下，又问：但贵区境界内的垃圾桶不是天天早晨有人收拾的吗？如果如此，今早扫垃圾的清道夫怎么没有瞧见这一把刀？莫非在垃圾扫过以后？
Hawthorne touched his chin and thought for a moment, then asked, But aren't the trash cans in your district cleaned every morning? If so, why didn't the sweeper who swept the trash this morning see this knife? Could it be that after sweeping up the garbage?
才有人把这刀丢在那里的。汪巡官道：不，扫垃圾的时间固然规定在每天早晨9点钟以前，但这把刀在垃圾桶的旁边，相距约有1尺，并且那里有些乱草，不容易引起注意。
Did someone just leave this knife there? Inspector Wang said, No. Although the time for sweeping the trash is set before 9 o'clock every morning, the knife is next to the trash can, about a foot away, and there are some weeds there, so it is not easy to attract attention.
还有一张破新闻纸掩住了一半，似乎是被风吹在上面的。若是不留心，当然瞧不见。霍先生，你知道我是特地到那里去查看的，自然应当别论。
There was also a piece of torn newsprint half covered, which seemed to have been blown by the wind. If you don't pay attention, of course you won't see it. Mr. Hua, you know that I went there specially to inspect, so naturally I should leave it alone.
所以你若一定说这刀是今天早晨9点钟后丢在那里的，未免有些说不通。他的语调中露出自满的得意，他的胖头也不自主地晃了几晃。霍桑点头道：原来如此。
So if you must say that the knife was thrown there after 9 o'clock this morning, it would be a little unreasonable. His tone revealed complacency, and his fat head shook a few times involuntarily. Hawthorne nodded and said, Well, that's it.
既然有这样的情节，我这想法自然不能成立。这样，我们不妨假定这把刀大概是凶人在行刺以后开了东窗，从窗口里丢下去的。他又回头问我道：包朗。
Since there is such a plot, my idea cannot be established. In this way, we might as well assume that the murderer opened the east window and threw it out of the window after the stabbing. He turned back and asked me, Bao Lang.
那东窗不是本来虚掩着没有下栓吗？你总也瞧见的吧？他的观察能力真是巨细不捐。我点了点头，我答道：是的。我当初还曾把那扇窗仔细验过，窗上的铁条丝毫没有移动的痕迹。
Wasn't the east window originally ajar and unbolted? Did you see it anyway? His observation ability is really great. I nodded. I replied, yes. I had carefully inspected the window, and there was no sign of any movement on the iron bars.
我就断定他不能做凶手的通道，但我的眼光给铁条阻隔住窗口下面的凶刀，当然瞧不见。霍桑道：这不能怪你，你也不必辩白。我的视线也一样不可能曲折。他又把那刀细细瞧了一会。
I concluded that he could not be a conduit for the murderer. But my vision was blocked by the iron bars, so of course I couldn't see the murderous knife under the window. Hawthorne said, I can't blame you. You don't have to defend yourself either. My sight is equally impossible to bend. He looked at the knife carefully for a while.
重新还给江巡官。汪巡官，你能够发现这一把刀，足见你精细过人。这刀对于案子的进行多少总有些注意。现在你应急速回去，吩咐那坚守张家前门的警士们。
Return it to Inspector Jiang again. Inspector Wang, the fact that you were able to find this knife shows that you are extremely sophisticated. This knife will always be helpful to the progress of the case. Now you should go back quickly and instruct the police officers guarding the front door of Zhang's house.
如果有什么形迹可疑的人走进门前，应当暗暗注意，不要放走，也不要贸贸然去惊动。说得明白些，应当相机行事，偷查可疑人的行动。我所说的可疑人中间，
If someone acting suspicious approaches the door, you should be careful not to let him go, and don't rush to alert him. To put it more clearly, we should act on the camera and spy on the actions of suspicious people. Among what I call suspicious people.
那打离差的阿荣是最紧要的一个，应得特别注意。最好你另外派一个人到他家里附近去守候一下。只有阿荣应得特别注意吗？我看那个看门的金兽也像是暗中要紧人。霍先生。
Rong, who is playing a separate role, is the most important one and deserves special attention. It would be best if you send another person to wait near his home. Is Rong the only one who deserves special attention? I think the gatekeeper Jean Shou also seems to be an important person in the case. Mr. Hua.
你可同意？金兽的地位果然很重要，但我早晨向他问话，觉得他的话条理不乱，不像是他假造得出的。可是我刚才问他，他却吞吞吐吐，不由不叫人生疑。霍桑微笑道
Do you agree? Jean Shou's position is indeed very important, but when I asked him about it this morning, I felt that his words were coherent and did not look like he was fabricating them. But when I asked him just now, he was hesitant, which made people suspicious. Hawthorne smiled and said,
我想你若能换一副面孔对他，他也许不会吞吞吐吐了。他又未免了几句，就送汪希年出去。我等霍桑重新回进了办事室中，又提出我的疑团来。霍桑
I think if you could change your face towards him, he might not be hesitant anymore. After a few more words of comfort, he sent Wang Xinian out. I waited for Hawthorne to return to the office and raise my doubts again. Hawthorne.
你从这一把刀上可能得到什么线索？霍桑道：我瞧那刀是寻常的水果刀，刀虽是新的，却已经磨过几回，一些没有锈斑。这可以想见那人的一种磨砺已虚的姿态。
What clues can you get from this knife? Hawthorne said, I think that knife is an ordinary fruit knife. Although the knives are new, they have been sharpened several times and some have no rust spots. This can be imagined as a hard-working attitude of that person.
进一步又可以想见那人怀怨已经好久了。我道：还有别的见解吗？霍桑似乎不听的扬起些身子，迟疑地说：我打算再到张家去。意外的挫折打扰了我的问句和霍桑的表示。
Furthermore, it can be imagined that the person has been holding a grudge for a long time. I said, do you have any other opinions? Hawthorne didn't seem to listen. He leaned up and said hesitantly, I plan to go to Zhang's house again. The unexpected setback disturbed my questions and Hawthorne's expression.
电话室中的铃声又铃铃地响起来。意外发现，这一次电话中的消息差不多像晴空中的霹雳，实在太出人意外。打电话的是许继仁医官，除了称呼，只有3句话，干脆而简短。
The ringtone in the phone room rang again. 9. An unexpected discovery. This time the news on the phone was like a thunderbolt in the sky. It was so unexpected. The caller was Medical Officer Su Jiren. Apart from his title, he only had 3 sentences, which were crisp and brief.
那3句话是：这案子的真凶我已经得到了，你们等一等，我立刻就来。这消息给予霍桑的刺激也相当大，显见他是突如其来的，也不是他意料所及。他把2手插在裤袋中，皱着眉头。
Those 3 sentences are, I have found the real culprit in this case. Just wait, I will come right away. This news also stimulated Hawthorne quite a lot. It was obvious that it came out of the blue and was not what he expected. He put his hands in his pockets and frowned.
不住地在室中踱来踱去，口中还喃喃地咕噜着：奇怪，真想不到，他的职务是检验，怎么会得到真凶？我们尽了4个人的力，忙碌了半天，还没有到达成功的地步，他却越俎代庖。
He kept pacing back and forth in the room, muttering in his mouth. Strange. I can't believe it. His job is to test. How could he get the real murderer? We tried our best as 4 people and worked for a long time, but before we reached the stage of success, he got ahead of himself.
一举手间便坐享其成。太奇怪，我说你总也相信世事万变，往往有出乎情理以外的，但这一着究竟太奇诡。霍桑停了脚步，仰起头来：包朗，你听他的报告是不是只有这3句话？
Just lift your finger and enjoy the results. So strange. I said, you always believe that things are ever-changing, and there are often things that are beyond reason. But this move is so weird. Hawthorne stopped and raised his head. Bao Lang, when you listened to his report, did you only hear these 3 sentences?
我笑道：是啊，若是你因着推想不出来由，要叫我加添几句，我可捏造不出呢。霍桑不理会，他背负着手，继续的踱步。他的目光下垂，似在那里欣赏地毯上的花纹。一会他又立定了。
I smiled and said, yes. If you want to teach me to add a few words because you can't figure out the reason, I can't make it up. Hawthorne ignored it. He put his hands behind his back and continued to pace. His eyes were lowered, as if admiring the patterns on the carpet. After a while he stood firm again.
问道：包朗，许医官第一次打来的电话，你可也听清楚？他的问句如果不算突兀，也近乎无聊，分明因着推索不出内中的情由，有些东拉西扯。我不禁暗暗的好笑。我答道：怎么不清楚？
Asked, Bao Lang, did you hear clearly the first phone call from Dr. Su? If his questions were not abrupt, they were almost boring. It was obvious that he was rambling because he couldn't figure out the reason behind them. I couldn't help but be secretly amused. I replied, why is it unclear?
那时候他的话也没有几句，你可要我再说一遍吗？他说有刚呕吐的东西，含着汾酒和批毒，茶里面却完全没有毒。他又说检察官。霍桑忙摇手止住我。好了，好了，你别无理取闹吧。
He didn't say many words at that time. Do you want me to say it again? He said that the stuff he had just vomited contained fingio and arsenic, but there was no poison in the tea. He also said that the prosecutor. Hawthorne waved his hand to stop me. Okay, okay. Don't make trouble unreasonably.
我大笑道：那么你自己也得忍耐些。你方才还说这一件案子宜缓不宜急，怎么一会儿就这样子刻不容缓？霍桑道：我不也说时机是有转变的吗？ 此刻转变已经实现了。
I laughed and said, then you have to be more patient yourself. Just now you said that this case should be slowed down rather than rushed. Why is it so urgent all of a sudden? Hawthorne said, didn't I also say that the time has changed? At this moment, the change has been realized.
所以我说的缓急当然也不能不更替一下你。他依旧在打旋。我道，虽然许医官说即刻就来，等他一到，疑团就可以明白，那是在打算进行不迟。无论如何，你也用不着如此慌乱。
So of course I have to change the priorities I mentioned. He is still swirling. Dash, I said, although, Medical Officer Sue said, he will come immediately. As soon as he arrives, the mystery will be clear, and it will not be too late to proceed with the plan then. In any case, there is no need for you to panic.
霍桑似乎不听地举起手表来一瞧，说：“至多还有10分钟，他大概可以到这里了。”我又笑道：“你还是这样急？莫非你心中有无线电？”霍桑自言自语地说。
Hawthorne didn't seem to listen. He raised his watch to look at it and said, well, there are 10 minutes at most. He can probably get here. I laughed again. You are still so anxious. Could it be that you have a radio in your heart? Hawthorne said to himself.
我料他的意外的发现一定是在张家验尸的时候得到的。张家屋子里没有电话，可是他打电话时已离了张家。即使从张家到这里，乘汽车只需1刻钟，现在已经过了5分钟。
I guess his unexpected discovery must have been made during the Zhang family's autopsy. There was no phone in the Zhang family's house, so it was known that he had left the Zhang family when he called. Even though it only takes a quarter of an hour to get here from Zhangjia by car, 5 minutes have passed now.
不是再过10分他就可以到了吗？我应道，我也但愿他能够马上就到，才可以把我们从迷城里解放出来。你姑且吸一支烟静静吧。霍桑应变时的镇静精神是我素来佩服的。
Wouldn't it be possible for him to arrive in just 10 more minutes? I responded, I also hope that he can arrive soon so that he can liberate us from the maze. Just smoke a cigarette and be quiet. I have always admired Hawthorne's calm spirit when responding to emergencies.
可是这一次他竟会这样子焦急不耐，我自然不免要觉得可疑。他所以如此，也许有某种特别原因吧。大概这一个消息不但他从未料到，并且如果属实。
But this time he was so anxious and impatient, which naturally made me feel strange. Maybe there is some special reason why he is like this? Probably this news, not only did he never expect it, but if it was true.
还可能把他脑中所有的设想完全打消。他在诧异之余，就不自觉的不能自制力。霍桑果真坐下了，摸出纸烟盒来。我们吸了一会烟，彼此都静悄悄的。我从烟雾弥漫中瞧霍桑的面容。
It may also completely eliminate all the assumptions in his mind. While he was surprised, he couldn't help himself. Hawthorne actually sat down and took out the cigarette box. We smoked for a while, both in silence. I looked at Hawthorne's face through the smoke.
装肃而沉静，睫毛下垂，眼睛却不住地在眨动。他显然在竭力运思。若是能够把他思想的历程引申开来，我相信他反可以渡越太平洋而有余。忽然间，霍桑仰起头来，哼，许医官来了。
He was solemn and quiet, his eyelashes drooped, but his eyes kept blinking. He was obviously trying hard to think. If the process of his thought could be extended, I believe it would be more than enough to cross the Pacific Ocean. Suddenly Hawthorne raised his head. Huh. Dr. Sue is here.
我点神一听，并没有任何声音。莫非他想得出神了？霍桑已从椅子补跳起身来，推开了办事室的门走出去。我跟到办事室的门口，才听得大门外有汽车声音。果真有人来了。
I listened carefully, but there was no sound. Could it be that he was lost in thought? Hawthorne had jumped up from his chair, opened the office door and walked out. I followed to the door of the office and heard the sound of a car outside the door. Sure enough, someone came.
一会许继仁已走进来，霍桑便略去了应有的客套，忙着发问。他道：“许先生，你不是说凶手已经得到了？”许继仁一边点头，一边伸手去摸他的胸口的衣带。他答道：“正是。”霍桑又问。
After a while, Sue Jiren walked in, and Hawthorne skipped the courtesy and was busy asking questions. He said, Mr. Sue, didn't you say that the murderer has already obtained it? Sue Jiren nodded and reached out to touch his chest pocket. He replied, exactly. Hawthorne asked again.
可是阿来已经回来了。许继仁摇摇头，他已取了一本记事册出来。霍桑失望地重复的问句：“阿荣没有回来？”“没有。”“那么你说的凶手又是谁？”“在这里。”“凶手的名字叫做贾子清。”
But Ali is back. Sue Jiren shook his head. He had already taken out a notebook. Hawthorne repeated the question in disappointment. Arong didn't come back. No. So, who is the murderer you are talking about? Here. The murderer's name is Jia Ziqing.
许继仁在翻检他的手册，霍桑目不转睛地注视他，我也不禁怔了一怔。凶手是贾子清，可就是姚国英所查明的那个和有刚饮酒的姓贾的，或是另外有一个姓贾的人。
Sue Jiren was looking through his manual. Hawthorne stared at him intently. I couldn't help but be startled.